Kia ora tātou, nau mai, haere mai, and a warm welcome to our council meeting of Wednesday, the 4th of October, into October already, 2023. With our order of business this morning, councillors, if I could invite Councillor Fitzgerald to open with karakia. Thank you.
Ngā tēnā koe e te kahika. Mōre na tātou, mōre te whare. Koutou kei runga i te matanui no re me karakia tātou. Tū tawa mai I runga, tū tawa mai I raro, tū tawa mai I roto, tū tawa mai I waho. Kia tau ai te mauri tū, te mauri ora, ki te katoa, haumi e, hui e, tāki e. Tēnā koe.
Kia ora, thank you, Councillor. Now, this morning, our meeting is being recorded, it's being live streamed as norm on our council's YouTube channel. In terms of health and safety, and on fire exits there are listed the green running person sign, and if in the unlikely event of something happening, we evacuate to the assembly area, outside in the clock tower there, in the Te Maraahine, the square. Non-smoking facility, if you need to do that, go to Fielding, and we have a defibrillator that is located in the foyer entrance in the ground floor there. Any incidences, please report them to our administration team. To anybody that is presenting from an officer perspective, please, if you could just, because we have people online, if you could perhaps just give your name in the first instance you're speaking and your title. That'd be helpful, thank you. And we have councillors online. Councillor Zabellin is online. Welcome, Councillor. And expected is Councillor Meehan as well, but not online at the moment. So we'll go to our list of apologies, and we do have some apologies. So the council received the apologies from Councillor Hapata and Councillor Meehan and Councillor Zabellin for early departure. I'm happy to move those, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. If there are no comments, we will vote, please. And that has passed, 14 votes for and none against. Thank you. Right. Notifications of additional items, and there is one, and it is to receive a late item titled Approval for In-Country Travel in Japan, around Councillor Dennison, who is there with a national sports team, and to make some visits to some of our sister city partners, Mehara and the International IPU Pacific University there in Okayama, Japan. So the reasons for lateness, it was received after the agenda was published, and reason for urgency is travelling before the end of our next ordinary council meeting. So I'm happy to move that be accepted, and seconded by the Deputy Mayor. I'll open it up for any comments. Councillor Barn.
It's a question, if I could, about the reason for lateness, since I imagine that this has been planned for a long time. So why did it come to us with such short notice?
I'll ask Councillor, if you just pop your... you haven't logged in. Have you logged in? Yeah, you have. Okay, it's on. Councillor Dennison.
Thank you for the question. It is true that the appointment for the head of delegation has been in place for some time. Initial conversations were that this could be arranged outside of the meeting schedule. What prompted me is when I saw the Mayor's request for for travel expenses, that I thought actually this should be more formal than just grabbing a gift from council and making the visit. So, and in fairness, that's why I've haven't had a large request, and it's more ceremonial rather than spending days on end touring the city. And so the lateness was really prompted by that report from the Mayor's request. Thank you.
All right, councillors, if there's no other comments or questions there, we'll put this to the vote. This is just to receive it as an additional item. And that has passed, 13 votes for and 1 abstention. Right, public comment. I haven't received any requests for public comment, so... Sorry, Councillor Johnson, you need to turn your...
I still haven't got into this. You've skipped past declarations of interest. I didn't know if you'd realise that.
Sorry, I did, but I thought it was number 6, sorry. Yep, we're going to do declaration. So we'll do public comment first, and we'll come... Sorry, I've got this out of order. I've got so many bits of paper in front of me. So there is no public comment. So we'll move on to declarations of interest, and we're going to do that now. I'll declare an interest, obviously, in item number 10. Is there any others? Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Likewise, I'd declare an interest in item 22, and we'll present and not participate in the decision making.
Thank you. And likewise with me, the Deputy Mayor will step into the seat then. Okay, any other interests? No? Great, thank you. All right, we've got confirmation of minutes. And we have there recommended council that the minutes of the ordinary meeting of the 6th of September 2023, Part 1, public, be confirmed as a true and correct record. That the minutes of the extraordinary meeting of the 27th of September 2023, Part 1, public, be confirmed as a true and correct record. So I'm happy to move those. Seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Any matters arising? There being none, we will vote, please. Sorry, that's passed. 13 votes for, 1 abstention. Okay, we move through now to number 8 on our order of business, and it's page 23 of your papers, councillors. It's around housing outcomes for Summerhay Street, number 17 to 19 Summerhay Street. I'll invite our property manager, Bryce Hosking, to speak to this.
Morena, councillors. This is essentially following on from the workshop we held in early August, which you all provided some good direction on the kind of outcomes you were looking to achieve. But in order to formalise those before moving through to the next stage, wanted to bring a report to you on these things as well. Also an opportunity to provide a little bit more information in some cases and a little bit more context to things. Notably, we've added a section in around if council wanted to explore a partnership, some of the things you might want to consider. That decision doesn't need to be made today. However, as the paper suggests, there are some things that would need to be thought about if that was something that you would like to do. Majority of the decisions in this paper, in terms of the outcomes you're trying to achieve from the site, that is essentially what we're trying to achieve. So that decision can be made today if you feel comfortable. I guess noting that if we were to enter into a joint venture or a partnership down the track, the partner may want some input into the sort of final designs, but I don't think that would prevent us from progressing from this stage and actually starting to develop some things up which can facilitate some of those outcomes you're trying to achieve. Alongside that as well, we have done some very sort of high level indicative concept designs which have included. The final designs will likely not look exactly like that, but reflecting on the conversation in the workshop around good practice urban design and some of the things we were trying to achieve, thought it was important to at least provide some high-level concepts to help facilitate a bit of a conversation and get a bit of direction around the kind of development you're trying to achieve, so we can take that and run with it in terms of detailed design. So happy to take the paper as read outside of that and answer any questions.
Thanks, Bryce. A number of questions. I'll kick it off. Thanks for the options and that. Would we approach this would we go out for a proper tender, proper registration, registrations of interest, then a tender process around the design as well, or are we just fixed into this sort of look and design?
No, absolutely. We would be facilitating an open market process to get the right kind of architect, get some urban design specialist input and things like that as well. So we don't have that capacity in-house, so we'd definitely
that's
be going
where
out.
I'm heading.
Yeah.
Wouldn't the architect? I mean, you mentioned the urban design separately, and I know that we have a two-step process here, which is different to other councils. But wouldn't the architect do that as well?
Very possibly. So depending on who we chose, that might be one and the same, or potentially we could opt to go with an architect and maybe also seek some specialist urban design input as well, as a bit of an overlay, which we have done on some projects. And an example of that would be Papeoia Place. So Boone, who are the architect there, did have some in-house capacity, but we also did a bit of an overlay through Mackendale Urban, who have done work on things like the arena, to really try and maximise those outcomes and just get a bit of diversity of thinking.
Does that not add another layer of cost if the architect does have those capabilities?
It can do. From experience, it's relatively minimal. If we're double layering that, for instance, for things like Papeoia, it maybe added 40 grand to the design cost total over stages 2 and 3 in particular. So it wasn't a significant cost.
Okay. So can I ask these options here? Where have these come from?
In terms of the outcomes?
No, who?
Oh, these two concept options. So alongside some of the initial investigation work and some of the work we were doing to lead into the workshop to facilitate some the discussion we had, we also got some high level sort of concepts to try and understand the number of dwellings we might be able to get from the site, and took the opportunity to get some high level sort of input from an architect and an urban designer around what we might like to achieve. And these were a couple of the options that, as I said, they're pretty high level stuff. It's still blocks on paper, but it provides a couple of options on how we might get good outcomes on the site, but a couple of different ways. You could have a central green space, or you could try and intensify that. There is quite a bit of amenity in the area, which is a plus. So that does potentially remove some of the need to be trying to do it all within the site, because we have several parks that are walkable from the site and things like that as well. But ultimately, still, we want to be trying to achieve the best outcome we can.
Okay, thanks, Bryce. I'll open it up for others. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Bryce. I have got a few questions. The first one is around the use of the MSD social housing register as an indicator of need. So, I mean, obviously, as you're aware, the types of people are and families, the demographic, I suppose, of people on the MSD list is different to the demographic on our council waiting list. So can you just explain what the thinking was behind referencing that one rather than our waiting list?
There is a bit of crossover, so everyone on the MSD list is on our list as well, but you're right, the MSD list probably takes a more broader picture and goes past what is essentially on council's list. Really the thought was simply just trying to provide some context of the overall picture and appreciating that there are some people looking for housing that might not be on our list, that maybe are captured in the MSD list.
But the thing, I mean, my assumption has been, and correct me if I'm wrong, that we wouldn't be expanding the types of demographics that we're providing housing to. So, in other words, we'd be still continuing to provide housing to the people, the seniors on just on super with a community services card, and people on supported living payment. That we wouldn't be necessarily expanding that into, families with children or whatever. That's the assumption, but is that a correct assumption?
Yep, that's also the assumption we've taken to date.
Okay.
So unless council was to provide some a direction to the contrary, that's definitely the assumptions made.
Okay, and not for any of it to be public housing, that we've got the 100 public housing units. So is the idea that this would all be the income-related rent type housing?
I mean, yes. I mean, we have an opportunity. We could do more than that, and I suppose that comes down to that mixed option in some ways. So we could do that. I mean, essentially, we classify all the housing as social housing. Some of it's subsidised and some of it's unsubsidised, which is the other way to look at it. So social housing would still fit within that category of the type of candidates, I guess, or future tenants we would be looking at. If we were to go to public housing that sort of pushed past that list, then that's probably more that mixed option, number C, I think it was.
Okay, so if we were to opt for social housing, that would still include the unsubsidised social housing that we provide as an option?
It could do, yes.
Okay, thank you. And then in terms of the design, my read of the diagrams is that there are some single-storey and some two-storey properties, is that right?
Potentially, yes. Ultimately, what we're just trying to show is in order to get the best kind of outcomes, it's quite good to have the diversity of buildings. We don't always need to try and make them identical like we have in Papeoia. And the makeup of the site is not quite as expansive. It's a bit more contained. To get that diversity and get probably the best outcome is to bring a bit of variety in. So hence suggesting some duplexes and some terraced housing and a bit of a change in there too.
No, I understand that, but I had thought from the workshop that we had indicated that we were hoping to have two-storey and three-storey rather than single-storey and two-storey. Was that the message that you understood?
That was definitely the direction, and that's definitely can and will be incorporated through the designs. As I said, please just treat the ones in front of you as a bit of an indicative layout more than any great concept on what it might look like in the end.
Okay, good, thank you. And in terms of central green space versus no green space, when we had the submissions on the rezoning, I suppose, of Summerhays, there were some submissions asking for some green space to be retained, weren't they? Was that what was behind the thinking around the green space, or is it more about amenity value for the residents?
Yeah, very, very much amenity value for the residents, and sort of provides a different outcome. I wouldn't envision this green space, whilst I guess there wouldn't be any specific barriers to someone using it outside of the development. I think for the purpose of this conversation, I'd suggest it would be a tenant space that they would be using and utilising.
Right, rather than, say, a public park.
Correct.
Yeah, okay. I'll just leave it there for now, Mr Mayor, and then I might come in at the end if there's any remaining.
Thank you, Councillor. You've opened up another question for me, just before I go to my colleagues. So just to clarify, we do public housing now, don't we?
Well, we have, our entire portfolio is social housing, but we have subsidised and unsubsidised.
Okay.
I guess may seem a little bit like a technicality, but public housing, I suppose, is
There's a big
opened up to
difference.
anybody. So essentially, you're just advertising it like you would any other private rental, and anyone could apply for it. Whereas currently, we have a certain criteria to be able to
Yeah.
occupy one of our houses.
So social, I understand what social housing is, and I think most of my colleagues do, but we're in the public. So who applies for the public? Is that pensioners? Is that elderly? Is that new migrants, refugees? Is that what's the public?
It can be. I might hand over to Kerry Lee, who the tenancy management of our housing is handled through her area. She might be able to give a more detailed response.
Kia ora koutou, Kerry Lee Probert, ko tōku ingoa, Acting Chief Customer Officer. Primarily the public housing is offered to tenants who have barriers to rentals. So they tend to be people on low incomes and experiencing substantive barriers to entering a rental property. So they can include families, although that is somewhat dictated by the building stock that we do have.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and you've started my questions for me. Thank you, Bryce. I'll use your terminology for the sake of clarity. So do we have a waiting list for unsubsidised social housing?
There is a waiting list for social housing. In some cases, some of the people on that list are solely waiting for subsidised housing, as in one of their big barriers is affordability. There are some people on that list, as I understand it, who perhaps that is not as much of a barrier, and maybe they have a barrier in another way, in which case that was more appropriate.
And so do we have a breakdown of that delineation, or is it just a conceptual we might have some people who are looking for unsubsidised housing?
No doubt we would have a breakdown. I don't have that to hand, though, but we could probably provide it.
All right, thank you. I want to wrap my head around the design. I appreciate they're only concepts, but there's a number of things in here that I don't quite understand. So, for example, there's a plot here that says the smallest plot shown is 127 square metres. Is that in terms of the land that it will occupy, or is that in terms of the amount of floor area the building will have?
That's indicating the floor area,
Okay, so
as opposed to the section.
So it's indicating if there was a two-storey home there, you'd have 2 floors of 63 square metres each, effectively.
Potentially, yes.
Okay, and so in terms of the comment here around dwellings, are you saying dwellings as in that will be the physical unit, but you might have 2 apartments in there, say, or are you saying dwellings as in a dwelling that one person could occupy?
For the purpose of this, a dwelling was, I guess, per rental agreement might be a nice way to do it. So obviously, if we went an extra floor up, or we perhaps went 2 stories up, then that dwelling number could increase.
Okay.
But importantly, so also would construction, because you were building higher and adding to it from what it is currently shown.
So what I don't understand about this design then is that you're suggesting in the recommendations here that we do 1 and 2 bedroom homes, which have an average floor area of 70, 80 square metres, maybe 90, and yet all of the designs are 130 to 235 square metres, which would indicate to me 3 or 4 bedroom homes. So I'm just trying to understand what because this looks like to me that you'd have 60 dwellings or 70 dwellings if you're putting people on multiple stories, but it's indicating we might only get 26 out of a site.
It's a fair point. I guess for context, when we got these designs done, it was at the initial investigation stage, so some of that was done prior to the workshop. So I suppose since that time, council gave some direction in that workshop. They're looking at 1 to 2 bedroom units, and due to time constraints, the plans haven't been updated to reflect that. I think it's fair to say the more dense we go, the more units we can get, and potentially, I wouldn't go so far to say this is by any means a baked cake of design. I think there's a fair bit to be done in that to work around that and actually start to come up with the solution we're actually looking for.
Fair enough. And so in the page around page 24, on option 1 under the financial considerations, it talks about how the costs would differ between terraced housing and apartment style housing. our recommendation doesn't include a recommendation for apartment style housing, it just says duplex housing and terraced housing. When you say apartment style, do you mean that there would be apartments in the duplexes, or would we need a separate recommendation that gets us to consider design options for apartment style housing, given the report indicates they would come at a significantly higher cost?
What I was trying to indicate was, for instance, in the scenario where you might do multiple layers, for instance, a bit more of an apartment style feel, as opposed to a house in a more traditional sense.
And so that's included in the
the more dense
recommendation.
you go, the more the cost will increase because the more that you're building. And I guess it's a little bit difficult at this stage to be providing any real direction on exact costs, but wanted to try and provide some high-level direction to at least give some context to the decisions you're making today.
All right, so apartment style housing will still be considered in either of the, whether we go with option A or option 2A or 2B?
Correct.
All right. My only last question is, if we wanted to indicate that we would like to see a mix of subsidised and non-subsidised housing under option 1, would you like an additional 1F recommendation from us, or can we take that as in the spirit of what will be done?
You can take it in the spirit, but I guess for cleanliness, I would suggest, yes, put forward a recommendation and then it's on the record.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. And I'm interested in option 3, just understanding a little bit more about that. The paper in the description of the 3 options has got the same financials for all 3 options. Is it safe for us to assume that the design, if we were to go for option 3, would the design of the units be the same, the social housing ones be the same as the ones that were provided to sell on the market?
I don't think the exact designs between them would be exactly the same, but one thing that I think we would be trying to bring through from a design point of view is to give future flexibility. So for instance, if we went for that apartment style, it wouldn't differ significantly depending on whether it was social housing or private housing. I mean, it may have different features, and for instance, some of the private housing might have a different requirement, perhaps to some of the social housing. But in terms of, so they won't be identical, but I think we'd be looking to bring through some pretty consistent design principles. So, I don't know, in the future, should this no longer be used for social housing, say, at some point, there's some flexibility that it could appeal to a different piece of the market in the future.
So essentially what would be different between a unit that would be for the market versus a unit that would be built for social housing or unsubsidised?
Some of the things could be specifications, for instance. It could be around accessibility, potentially. Really, there's a whole variety of things. Some of them could be a bit bigger than 1 or 2 bedroom houses. Maybe that could be something we could be exploring through the design stage, if it's no longer just for social housing for some of the private ones. So there's a few things we could be looking at.
Okay, thank you. I guess why I'm asking that question, the risk that has been identified under option 3 is that we do not yet know, or one of the risks is we do not yet know how attractive a mixed-use development would be to the private housing market. If units, I'm trying to understand the rationale for the order of decision-making that is in front of us as well, given that all the options are, you know, it looks like a similar estimate in terms of price. If we took an approach that what is good for social housing is good for the private market and included the accessibility attributes and other appealing attributes to all of the units, but if we went for a mixed model, could that risk be mitigated by including some level of optionality to the model, as in do a mix, put it to the market. If the market for whatever reason didn't find those units attractive enough to sell, then we still have the option of unsubsidised or subsidised housing for those options. Would that mitigate that risk? Or is that an option, and if so?
It would somewhat mitigate it in some ways. Yes, that degree of flexibility, I suppose, it does give that opportunity. Some of that risk sits purely with perception, unfortunately, is there is a perception about social housing and regardless of whether that's true or not, sometimes perception becomes the reality. And so a mixed model like that, especially in Palmerston North, has not really been tested. So there is a degree of risk if we were trying to sell those to the private market, they might not sell. But if we did design them in a way that maybe we could then take them back into our portfolio and use them for social housing, then that would probably be a good way to try and lessen and mitigate some of that risk at least.
Okay, thank you. My next question is around, has there been any high-level analysis of the operational revenue and costs for option 1?
There is a little bit. In terms of consequential OPEX, my rule of thumb for housing at the moment is about 30 to 40 grand a dwelling.
Sorry, I didn't quite catch what you just said.
$30,000 to $40,000 a dwelling for consequential OPEX, which includes everything from staff time through to maintenance, insurance, and all those kind of things. Is a nice rule of thumb. So you might be talking, if you had, say, an average of 30 dwellings, you might be looking somewhere in the $900,000 to $1 million of consequential OPEX. In terms of revenue, subsidised incomes typically are 25% of people's incomes, and if we base that over the majority of our portfolio, typically it's about 20% of the total cost of having social housing is covered through income, as a very broad brushstroke across the portfolio as we currently have it.
And does that include the unsubsidised units as well?
Correct. So if we look at all the income and all the cost across all of our 443 units, as we now have, now that Papeoia is completed, that's a very broad overview of about 20% of it is covered through income coming in from the tenants. The other 80% is currently coming from ratepayers.
Okay, thank you. And was, in terms of the officer's recommendation, was the ongoing operational costs of all these options considered?
It was considered. I think it'd be fair to say it was a bit of an omission on my behalf of not including that in the report, so apologies. It definitely is something we need to be considering, and it was based on the social housing, which is why I broke it down to, I guess, a dwelling level to give you that figure of 30 to 40,000, because obviously if we went for option C or even option B and look to sell those units, then some of that will not be realised, but if you retained all of them, that gives you a bit of an idea.
Okay, thank you. And just final question was around, you mentioned the amenity in the area, that there are some parks walkable from the site. Do you have, sorry, I can't just think off the top of my head, but do the distances and the number of green spaces around that area meet our requirements for that what we've set in our policy as being ideal?
Aaron is up there, which he may jump in, but essentially, yes, we did an assessment early on as part of the investigation process, and did give some consideration to our current policies on distance to green space and things like that.
Yeah. Sorry, just one final question. Do we need to make this decision before the next stage of the design work is done?
In terms of the outcomes?
The options.
Possibly where the restriction could come in potentially is really around progressing with confidence in the designs, and I suppose the more decisions we can lock in today, I suppose that helps us to actually start to really dive into some of that detail, and with detail comes more certainty around things like cost, and the more uncertainty that gets left on the table today, I suppose, limits that somewhat. I think as well, if you were to make a decision around potentially looking at a partner or a joint venture, the decision around whether something's social housing or whether it's private will drive and dictate some of those partners and potentially drive some of that work if that's something you wanted to consider.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Again, just some of those questions, if I was just writing down some notes here. So probably Aaron as well. So the two parks, we're talking Milverton and Memorial. Is that what you're talking?
Yeah, correct.
That are close?
Yep.
I did a drive. They're both at least half a kilometre away. Is that in our policy? I thought our policy was 400 metres.
Aaron, I'll let you come down and speak to that. I mean, Milverton's a block away, essentially, block and a half. But
Yeah.
I'll let Aaron speak to that.
But you walk it, Bryce, and you'll find out how far it is.
Good morning, Mr Mayor and Councillors. Aaron Phillips, Parks Activity Manager. Excuse me, I have a slight nagging cough that might be a little intimidating, but that was a last week thing. You're correct, the current parks are the, I don't know if you'll recall, but during the assessment of Summer Hayes, at the time you also had a program for investigating the potential redevelopment of the depot. And the findings at the time were that if there is a small shortfall in the areas between Milverton and Memorial Park, and the recommendation was, though, that if that were to be filled, it would be better filled at the depot location if that project ever proceeded. It would also then be directly associated with a community centre, assuming that that didn't relocate as part of the depot proposal, if the depot proposal ever proceeded, there'd be a larger volume of higher density housing or medium density housing in that location than there would at Summer Hayes. So it was a case of we don't want to do both. There is a bit of a shortfall, but not a significant one that warranted allocating perhaps half of the Summer Hayes site to a reserve.
Okay. And be fair to say Terrace End, well, I suppose Summer Hayes is Terrace End, one of our older city suburbs, so we don't have the same level of green verges. It's big full tarmac footpaths, street trees, not a lot of street trees.
I think that would be a fair, broad reflection of the area, yes.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thanks, Mr Mayor, and thanks, Bryce. I've just got a couple of questions just to tidy up a few things in my mind. Firstly, the option one, if we were to track down that path, I see the financials as that potentially, we've got the 4.56 million from the Better Off funding, and we've got potentially the $15 million that's allocated in the long-term plan. I'm just curious in terms of if we were to use both of those funds for option one, what are the implications for other programs post Summer Hayes?
That's a good question. If council was looking to use those funds in their entirety, combined together to essentially pay for this development, which sort of lands there or thereabouts in terms of the financials I've provided anyway, essentially you would be using up that program for additional social housing in its entirety. Therefore, through the LTP, if you wish to do even more housing again, in terms of additional housing, council would need to consider that through that process.
Yep, okay, thank you. And the second, perhaps a couple of questions in here, just in terms of recommendation 2 in the paper is around either having a central shared green space or no shared space. Did we consider a partial in-between option where we might retain some of the green space in that central island?
There are considerations, and that's where I come back to my comment of I wouldn't say it will look exactly like it is on paper, and I think there will be a balance there between providing or meeting some of our housing goals, but then also trying to provide an appropriate outcome. If you go too small in terms of that space, it sort of becomes a little bit redundant because if the intention is for people to be able to use that for a whole variety of things, coming out to have barbecues, having family around and things like that, you want to have a space that's actually going to be able to provide a bit of that. By going for a medium density type envelopment, none of the units would really have their own particular sort of green space or private space of any material effect. Thinking somewhere like, say, Papeoia, they have their own little gardens, but essentially they don't have their own yard. So another way of looking at this would be to create essentially a big joint yard in the middle.
Yes, okay. But the way the paper has been presented for us, I guess, is that under recommendation 2, we're being asked to either choose between either no green space or some green space, right? So
Correct.
there does not appear to be any flexibility in that. That's what I'm...
If you were to vote in favour of a green space, we would go away and do some work in the spirit of that decision, and we would consider that green space and consider our options around what that might look like, including size. If council was to decide to not have a green space, then obviously we would be focusing more around intensifying units. So it's probably more around where that balance is, as opposed to necessarily the size of the green space. But the spirit of the decision, if you want a central green space, would be to then think about how that could be given effect to.
Great, thanks, Bryce. That's very helpful. Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Finlay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Bryce, I think Councillor Johnson asked the question, but I wasn't quite sure the answer. Do we know the numbers on the waiting list we have for subsidised accommodation at the moment? Could we find that out? Is it possible?
We can definitely find that out and confirm it on the waiting list. I recall our waiting list was about 400 people, was the last figure I heard, but perhaps even a little bit higher than that. But that will give you some indication of the crossover.
So we're looking at over 400 people on the waiting list for subsidised housing in City Council at the moment.
Correct.
So if we decided with Summerhill or that we could put, say, subsidised housing in there on the same sort of line as Papeoia Place, how many units could we put in Summerhill on the same design as Papeoia?
I don't have that exactly. It would end up being a design more likened to layout number 2, for instance, except it would be a whole bunch of smaller units. Look, I'll take a punt and say you might get maybe 40, maybe even 50 one-bedroom, single-story units in there. But I must emphasise that's me taking a bit of a punt on on knowledge as opposed to any kind of accuracy.
So that's 40 to 50.
Again, that's me really speculating with no designs in front of me, sorry.
A little bit off this, but along the same lines with it. We have the land on Park Road. If that was sold off to sections, could the money from that be diverted to help pay for the cost of building social housing in Summerhill?
That is a good question. There will be some restrictions around any sort of revenue that we may get from Huia Street in terms of its previous use being a reserve and things like that. But I mean, ultimately, if council chose to get revenue from another source and use it to help fund something, then that's the decision of council, probably not me.
Okay, one last question. If we decided, well, let's just subdivide Summerhill, not Summerhill,
Summerhays. Yep.
Divide it up and set it up as sections, how many sections would we have on there?
Well, I guess that would come down to the size of the sections and the density you would go for. In the workshop, I did provide some indicative numbers in terms of more traditional sections and what you might get out of that.
Yeah.
But obviously, if we just took it to a more intensified section basis and sold those sections is probably more likened to what you can see in terms of numbers on the plans in this paper.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you. Just going back, are we, excuse me, I haven't understand that we haven't actually decided if this would be dedicated as social housing until this decision today. Is that correct?
Correct. You've provided direction in the workshop, but this is your opportunity to actually make a decision.
So you mentioned about the financial modelling around the cost of development and the cost of operation. When you said that it was 30 to 40,000 of OPEX, was that per annum per property? Was that?
Yeah, correct.
Okay. And then, so where's the longer term modelling that we would want to consider, I would have thought, around the development and then the hold, where that fits into our budget? Because obviously you said it only covers 20% of the income if we keep social housing.
That will definitely come, and that can be provided. I guess the difficulty about that at this stage is there's a lot of assumptions on the table in terms of number of units, what that might look like. The actual build costs are unknown at this point until we actually start to develop some of the plans. That modelling definitely needs to come, and that needs to be projected. But really the figures in front of you and the figures I've provided today are helping, I guess, to give some context to your decisions, but I would envision that that financial modelling is still to come as through the design phase.
Okay. And likewise with the model of private market, what the potential return on if we went down that track to the city. Yep. on a current valuation for a 1 and 2 bedroom place we could model out, which isn't in this report either.
No, it's not. In preparation for this, I did a bit of work around some high-level modelling based on the type of houses shown in those layouts, for instance. You'd be looking at about an 8% return on investment, would probably be an approximate target. Again, there's a lot of subjectivity to that in terms of final sale prices, final designs and things like that. But indicatively, if you worked to an 8% return on selling everything to the private market, that probably gives you a good indication.
Okay. In a previous question, you mentioned that the land area or the measurements on these plans were actually for the floor area of the building. Is that correct?
Yeah, they are.
Can I question that? Because on the first plan on 4.10, I'm sure it's land value, because on the corner sections of those designs, it goes from 159 in the top left-hand corner, and then the next dwelling next to it with the very same footprint is 335. I'm sure that's land.
I mean, typically, if you look at the smallest sections in something like, say, Tamakuku, from a consentable design, we're right down at about 300 square metres for a section, is sort of the smallest ones in say, Tamakuku. So getting down to 150 is getting pretty small. I mean, granted, there's some intensification here, and as I said, maybe don't get too caught up on some of those figures. So the ones that say 335, for instance, might, and for the purpose of this, be a multi-storied one for the purpose of this design. So obviously, it has multiple levels. But
okay, well, thanks for that. So the better off funding that we've attained for the development, does that still have, that's done for the scoping out, but then we still have a potential, have we secured the 4.56 that is noted in the financials?
Yes.
And is that for either option around social housing outcomes or market housing?
We tied that to housing outcomes at Summerhay Street. And it covered everything from the design through to consent, and also through to contributing towards the construction.
Okay. And that are my questions. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Bryce.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Bryce. A couple of questions left on my list. One's just around thinking about, on the social housing angle, some of the needs that would be present in some of those demographics of tenants, and kind of what, at this stage, the thinking is about multi-level housing being able to be built and adapted in a way that meets some of those needs around aged people and others that may have mobility limitations, et cetera. Is that all kind of compatible, or is there tension there that we need to resolve?
It definitely needs to be a consideration. There could be potentially a couple of different ways to facilitate that, everything down to even putting a lift of sorts in. I guess I don't have any particular detail on that at this point in time, but definitely it would need to be something that would need to be considered for those multi-storey units.
Great, thank you. To the question of green space, if we were to include green space at this stage, would that space be, I guess, set aside in a way that could potentially accommodate a subsequent stage of development in 10, 20, whatever years' time, if there was deemed to be a need at that point to fill that in with subsequent housing development?
Yes, I think so. Possibly you wouldn't. I guess a restriction could be you may not get the absolute best outcome that you might do if you designed it, say in layout number 2, for instance, right now. But is there anything stopping council in the future from converting that into units? Probably not. We could try and, well, I mean, the majority of the civil work around services and things would have enough provision for more housing, for instance, so that would remove a barrier in that sense. It would more come down to probably how we would do that in a meaningful way to maintain strong outcomes.
Great, thank you. Finally, just around the operating costs, is there any general relationships that we might want to be aware of in terms of what influences operating cost at a per unit basis? I'm thinking of things like the level of intensification. Is there any relationship between intensification and ongoing cost?
That figure's been taken through our existing portfolio to get a bit of an idea. It includes everything from both preventative and reactive maintenance, some staff time. It includes things like insurance. So it's sort of an all-encompassing cost. No doubt there will be some variability between intensification as opposed to maybe a 3-bedroom house. And naturally, if we've got some bigger houses, then they would potentially take more income to maintain potentially. So it very much is probably an average for you. I think the other consideration as well is these would be brand new, whereas we have an aging portfolio across our entire portfolio. So naturally, as things age and assets deteriorate, we're having to factor in things like roof replacements and all those kind of things that these obviously would be brand new, so would have a much lesser demand on cost up front.
Yeah, thanks. So would some of that variability and optionality be getting teased out then in the subsequent, in whatever stage is next of this development process, so that we'd have some information to hand?
Yeah, definitely. So as the designs continue and we actually start to develop those up, alongside that there would be the opportunity for some of that financial modelling, locking down some of the actual costs of these things, actually trying to get a much more accurate construction cost. But alongside that as well, it also starts to provide us the opportunity to get a lot more certainty around some of those things, rather than just a high-level average cost as I've presented today.
Yes, we'd expect to see both a refined around a build cost as well as a refined around an operating cost.
Completely, and that'll become more clear as we progress designs.
Great, thank you. Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just another couple of questions. Bryce, in terms of the Better Off funding that we've secured, do we have a time limit on spending that?
Yes, we do. It was 2027, I think, off the top of my head, mid 2027 it had to be used by. To give an idea from here, we would probably, if we got these decisions today and we started to move through a normal project timeline, I would be expecting us to be putting some shovel in the ground maybe around the summer of 2025, so sort of back in 2024, 2025.
Okay, and the 14 million that we've got in the long-term plan at the moment, what years is that in?
Currently, you have $1 million in the current year, and then you have 7 million in what was year 4 or next year, and then 7 million the following year.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of who might be living in these houses, we've tended as a council to kind of group people together in sort of kind of villages in a way, you know, so to take the example of Papaioa where we've got all seniors in there to form a community. Is there a view on whether or not that would be a better option in a place like this to form a community of, say, seniors or whatever, or is there a view that it would be better to have a mix of people of all ages and stages?
I think the importance of synergy between tenants becomes even more paramount the more intense you get. Because especially if you say they're sharing amenities, they're sharing spaces. So one of the key considerations our tenancy team would have to do is to be thinking about that. There hasn't been any thought towards whether this would lend itself necessarily towards seniors or anyone else in that group, but definitely that would have to be a big consideration because they're essentially living together, and the worst thing you could do potentially is have too much more friction in that space. It starts to detract from maybe some of the outcomes and create some social issues.
Okay, yes, thank you. I don't know if maybe through you, Mr. Mayor, to perhaps the CE or whoever, could we know what the current waiting list is for social housing on our books?
Yeah, I'll just go to Kerry Lee.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, currently we've got 570 applicants on our books at the moment. Of those, 273 are considered homeless. So those 273 are people that are living in cars, maybe couch surfing, or have been given notice.
Thank you.
Total was 570, and of those 273 we consider homeless.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Fitzgerald.
You've put me on, Mr. Mayor.
Oh. Councillor Fitzgerald.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Hey, thanks, Bryce. Bryce, did the officers, to your knowledge, have an indication of how many social housing providers are currently operating in Palmerston North?
We do have that information. I don't have it to hand, and I wouldn't want to give a figure at risk of maybe missing somebody out.
Yep, no problem. Secondly, and it's just a minor technical thing, in the options, option 1, A through D, it'll be fair to assume that 1, C and D would be included in whichever option we land on.
Definitely the direction through the workshop was, you were very clear that B, C, D and E, you were very aligned in terms of direction on that.
Wonderful. Just moving to the joint venture conversation, have the has the officers done any background work into, what's included in the paper, done any background work into the types of housing providers that are currently operating in Palmerston North City who could be useful joint venture partners?
No.
Okay, awesome. Last question then. Therefore, could the joint venture discussion and option be included in whichever option we decide on today?
It could. I suppose depending on, sort of speaking to an answer I gave previously, depending on the outcome you're trying to achieve, for instance, so if you wanted to achieve social housing, then that changes the type of potential partners we might be speaking to, as opposed to if you're just trying to do a private development, then that might be a much more broader, wider range of developers. Yeah, it probably doesn't necessarily matter, but in terms of the option you choose, which is why try to structure the paper in a way that you can give that confidence now and potentially make that decision about a joint venture later. I'd suggest if that is something that you want to consider, we would probably do a bit of an expressions of interest type exercise and start to flesh out some of those kind of things. In particular, we want to make sure whatever partner we potentially went with would align philosophically and maybe try and actually achieve some of the outcomes that we want to achieve together. And I think that would be paramount in any relationship we want to enter into.
Wonderful. Can I take it then, Bryce, that we could include joint venture as part of any option that the council decides today?
Yes, definitely. And if you explicitly would like us to go and actually investigate those, then you could potentially provide a resolution to do that if that's what you wanted us to do.
Sorry, Mr. One last question. I know that this is a difficult question, perhaps, Bryce. Does the council have a definition of social housing?
Yes, we do.
Yep. What is it, please?
Now you're getting me to quote the plan. Essentially, and I'll have to paraphrase this, so apologies, but it's social housing is targeting tenants with a barrier to entry, and then we start to specify what some of those things are. So it's people from senior citizens, people with disabilities, low income, and there's a whole bunch of qualifying criteria that fit that mould. And that's how we define what social housing is.
Wonderful. Would you agree then, Bryce, that if central government used the term public housing to mean state-owned, then the council's definition of social housing includes private considerations as well?
Our definition of social housing, which is why I sort of clarified around subsidised and unsubsidised, because the tenants who are in any of our housing still have to meet that criteria. It's just whether they are on a subsidised rental or not. When you start to talk about public housing, that is a slightly different deviation to that, and which is why I laboured on that point in this presentation.
Beautiful. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
I'll go online to Councillor Isabel, and you have a question, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Bryce. Just going back to the density and optimal numbers of dwellings, and just in terms of our network capacity for our 3 waters, to what extent should we be considering the ability of the network to absorb that when we're looking at how many dwellings we could optimally fit in this space?
Definitely, all of the water's capacity and all of those kind of considerations need to be had, and they will be worked through as part of the design process. I mean, they're absolutely critical in terms of outcomes, but also from a consenting standpoint. So we'd have to work through that in terms of whether the existing network has capacity or not. I couldn't answer that at this point, and I'd suggest that'll come through designs.
Okay, excellent. Thanks very much, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Wood this time.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry about this earlier. What are the floor areas of our units at Papuia Place? I thought I could find online, but I couldn't track it down.
They're about 80 square metres.
Right. And my only other question was, in regards to the Better Off funding, have we got that secured, as in the bank, or if there was a change of government, would that be at risk?
Cam may be able to answer whether it's in the bank or not, but definitely we have it. We have it secured in terms of committed to us. But Cam, you may like.
But my understanding, because I've been involved with this as well, it's a contract.
Yep.
So maybe is that right? I got him out of jail there. It may not be in the bank, but it's a contract
Right,
which
thank
would
you.
have to be broken.
All right, thanks, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Arnott.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Bryce. Better off funding question as well. Just like to double check, please. The 4.56, that's all going into Summer Haze, yeah?
Correct. So $500,000 of that was allocated towards the pre-construction phase, so design, consultation, right through to getting a consent, and then the balance of that was allocated towards a contribution to construction.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Bryce. That's our questions done. Councillors, we have a number of recommendations there. I'm going to move number 1, A, B, C, D, E, number 2A, and number 3. And I'll look for a seconder on that. Thank you, Councillor Johnson. There's a number of additional recommendations that have come in, and I think Councillor Wood, you have one, and Councillor Naylor, you have one as well. Look, councillors, I think if we could start from first basics, principles to start with. I agree that we've got to do something here in terms of housing. We're probably going to differ a little bit on what that looks like, and the devil will be in the detail. But we've got to agree that we were going to build some houses here. That's why we've done this bit of work at the start. It's what that housing should be. And look, I'll jump to why I favour the terraced and duplex with a central green space. And I teased that out in some of the questions. And the wider outcomes and goals we're trying to achieve. I just want to dispel the thoughts that there's a whole lot of green space on the doorstep. There isn't. It is high. It's our oldest suburb, right? Terrace End. It is highly tarmacked. It's high. There's not a lot of street trees, despite good intentions of previous councils and our current officers. There's not a lot of green spaces and verges. So you're going to have to walk a considerable long way to find anything. Milverton Park and Memorial Park, they're both over a half a kilometre away. And look, if you've got young kids or you're trying to walk there, you know what it's like. It's going to take you a little bit longer as you wait for young ones to catch up. So that on-site green space is really necessary. If we're going to cram multiple groups of people together, Papaioa Place works because it does have a little bit of green space on its doorstep, i.e. the park, but also we've put a little bit in the design as well. So that's why I favour that shared green space. Just in terms of option, the medium density, so A being the social housing outcomes, and option 1 is, I mean, we just heard some numbers. I mean, they were quite horrifying. And I know there is a lot of people that are doubled up on different lists, but regardless of which list you use, it's pretty horrific. And, you know, our office has been dealing with a whole lot of multiple homeless people, literally on the doorstep of the Mayor's office. So, you know, we do have an issue, and we do have a responsibility. But I think that is shared with some of our other partners, i.e. the government through Kāinga Ora and their housing portfolio, but also other community groups, and a number of you have interests in those as well. The inclusion of sustainable building practices. If we're going to do this, we want to do it well, and but there does need to be an understanding of the costs too, and I've been in business and I understand what things cost, but there is some public goodwill here as well. So the sustainable building practices and the development of the site needs to be well done. Design options around 1, 2 bedroom dwellings. I'd like to see, you know, some thought given to what that might look like. Bryce and the team, when we hopefully go out to something to come back, and the CE comes back with some sort of designs to us. But I just want to, and I will include D around the urban design, but I just want to comment on that briefly. You know, we've got to be careful. We've got a strong urban design theme through a lot of our work here, but it does cost. It does cost to do that. It's ingrained in our district plan as well, but we do it differently here to other councils. And Bryce, if you could come back to us with what the true cost was for Papiaoa Place and urban design, because yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. I believe it's hundreds of thousands, and the reason I say that, for Arena we tried to change a fence and it was $90,000, a small part of a fence. So the steering group, the first thing they dropped was the urban design part of it, because we already had it in the greater good of things. So what I'm trying to paint here, councillors, is we do need urban design in there, but it does need to be at a measured approach. I think it's really achievable via a good architect that knows their stuff. It's one of their parts of their discipline, and a very good project manager to keep control of the budgets and costs. And there's many great examples of that happening around the city. Just yesterday we opened a building in an industrial area which was 30% above code. Now, they didn't have urban design. They had a very, very good project manager and architect. So, look, I believe we can get there, but I'm going to leave it in because I'll create World War III if I take it out. So I'm a realist as well. So I've said enough, but I think thank you to the officers for the work. I believe that the finances, we've got 4.56 million in a contract with the government. That will go obviously towards this. That goes a long way to starting the project. The reason I haven't gone to the JVs is because this is quite a difficult space. You may open up a hornet's nest if we have a whole lot of joint venture people involved in it, and it may not be attractive to some organisations, and certainly it won't be attractive to companies. We do have some social housing money. I'm going to break my own rules here. We do have some social housing money in future budgets. We can be smart about this. We do have to probably keep a ring fence around the total cost. But it is getting up there in terms of the total cost per unit. But I'm sure with a bit of design flexibility and that we might be able to get an extra unit or two or three on the site as well. So I'll leave it at that. I'll open it up for other comments. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Overall, I think this is a really positive paper, and good to have these options in front of us to progress some housing, which is clearly very much needed for our city, and not only that, to have some external funding to contribute. I'm generally comfortable with the recommendations, aside from the fact that I am really concerned that this has come to us without to make a decision on how to proceed before we've really got a good understanding of the operational costs associated with that. We did get a little bit of an indication from the officer today that perhaps social housing, the revenue will only cover about 20% of the ongoing operational costs. I think as a council, it's clear that we are committed to social housing. I think we also need to find a sustainable way to progress that. And I'm not confident that option one, which is 100% social housing, is going to provide us a sustainable model going forward, especially when we're making a decision at this point to go down a path without having really good financials in front of us. My preference would have been to keep the optionality a little bit more open until we have a clearer idea of design and costings. However, if we are needing to give direction today, my preference would be option 3, which includes social housing, but also has a mix of social and private market housing outcomes. So I'd like to move an amendment to 1A, and that's seconded by Councillor Michelard, to change A to a mix of social and private market housing outcomes. Now, my thinking in wanting to progress that option is not to predetermine what whether it's 80% social and 20 market, or what that breakdown might be. But if we're looking at the sort of, my preference in terms of a model is pepper potting social housing around other normal housing, rather than a cluster where people go, that's where the social housing is. I think it's a healthier model. It's a model that sits more comfortably with me, and it's also a more financially sustainable model. The benefits in the paper clearly indicate the benefit of option 2 and 3 is providing additional revenue, and I think that is going to be very much needed as we look to perhaps progress this program, as well as perhaps other programs in the future. My other there was something else I was going to say, but it's sorry, it might come back to me. But look, I'll move that as an amendment, and my other thought might come back to me in time for the end of this discussion. But
Okay, Councillor, thank you. So, look, I'll take it as an amendment. And does anybody want to speak on the amendment? Just put your hand up. Councillor Johnson.
Yeah, I won't be supporting the amendment. I don't think a private housing provider. Our role is public good. And from the figures that we've just heard, the need for social housing in this city is enormous. I mean, absolutely enormous. And even if we were to provide, you know, at the best, 40 units on this site for social housing, that would be, of the people on our waiting list, 7% that we'd be providing for. So we'd still be expecting 93% of the people on the housing list to find some other means of getting accommodation, be that through Kāinga Ora or community housing providers or whatever. So we certainly wouldn't be expecting that we would be doing the lion's share of the provision of social housing that's needed in the city. We'd still only be making a very small contribution. The other thing is that we've got government money for this project. We've got 25% government money, more or less. And I think that the most important thing here is to consider what the needs are. The needs are around social housing. Let the private market provide private rental, and lets us focus on the needs of our community. So won't be supporting it. Thank you.
Councillor McLeod, sorry, I should have gone to you first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to this. I will be supporting this. I believe that we all have goodwill and we want to see social housing being developed in Palmerston North. And in fact, at our last long-term plan, I voted in favour of increasing our social housing budget to $14 million. So we're totally in favour of social housing, and I campaigned on this. And I said that I would be, you know, as long as I'm on this council, I will ensure that council retains an influence in providing social housing. So nobody's disputing the fact that we need social housing. But all options that have been provided to us here today, or in this paper, does the same thing, which is to help meet the need or the demand for housing in our city. Now, we've talked about the affordability side of things, but affordability is not the only issue in Palmerston North. It's accessibility, housing availability. I understand there's a tension between housing availability and affordability. Yes, we can provide affordability, but we also need to provide housing availability or housing provision in the city. And I believe option 3 gives us an option of a mixed and private model where we can provide social housing and also diversify income streams by also being able to sell off certain, by allowing us to sell off certain section of Summer Haze. So I'm in favor of this for the following reasons. Number one, it gives us an opportunity to diversify income streams, not overly relying on rates for income streams or resources. By selling some of these sections to housing developers as well. And also, the problem here is not necessarily housing affordability. It has to do with housing accessibility. And I see a role for the council to actually, I see a leading role for the council here in providing more land for both options. So it makes sense for us to have social housing on one hand and also housing for the private market. I don't see what the problem is around this issue. So a mixed model, I think, works better. As we've done a lot of social housing, and I believe personally that we should also have other options as well for other options or housing models that will meet the need of other renters as well, not just social housing or making this purely a social housing sort of provision. So I'm in favor of this for the pure principle that it's a mixed model that will meet the need of all renters in our community, not just the elderly or those on low income, but also for those newlywed couples who are looking for 2-bedroom houses or 3-bedroom houses, or let's say students. We also have a availability issue for students. So I'll be in favour of this. Thank you.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I won't be supporting this today for a few key reasons. Firstly, that this is sugar hit economics, so it will give us a short-term capital boost to help support the development of the program at the sacrifice of long-term operating sustainability for this development. My additional amendment, which I'll move after we go through this process, will be looking at a mix of subsidised and non-subsidised social market housing, which would help cover the costs and effectively help cover the subsidisation costs of social housing. So that gives us long-term operating sustainability rather than a short-term capital hit, which is what this amendment would do. My main issue with it is I just don't think it will work. As our officers have said, this has not been tested in the market before. Although I support people potting of housing, this is a very small condensed section we're talking about. If we had 3 hectares here, well, that would be a different story, but we're working on a very low amount of land that we're only going to be able to fit a very small amount of units into anyway. And so if we sell off 2 plots to a private developer who decides, oh, we're just going to build one big 3-bedroom family home, well, that's A, not in keeping with the development that we're trying to create, but B, also is not the most optimal use of a small amount of land. This isn't the right lever to pull. We're already pulling the lever of selling sections to raise capital and help support the private market at Tamakuku Terrace. So we're already doing what Councillor Michelard is trying to achieve in another area where it's more appropriate, where we have more land and where we're doing a fully private land sale development. So it will be in keeping with the spirit and culture of that development, which this would not be. If councillors wanted to, I guess, put more private 2- and 1-bedroom units into the market, then what I would recommend Councillor Naylor and Michelard do is support option 1, where we develop and support a greater density of option 1, and then look down the track, or give the option for councils down the track at unit titling the development that we're doing, where you might say, okay, well, we're going to sell 10 units off the top to the private market at a subsidised rate, or something along those lines. But where we've done the development, because if we hand it over to a private developer and say, here's a section, do what you want with it, well, there's no guarantee they're going to build terraced housing and duplexes and 2-bedroom units for the lovely newlywed couple. They might very well just build a 4-bedroom family home on it. So if you want to sell off 2-bedroom units, that's your prerogative, but let's do that by unit titling a pre-existing development rather than selling off the land and hoping something gets built that might be in the spirit of what we'd like. So I would much rather that we provided a mix of non-subsidised and subsidised social units, which helps look after our long-term operating costs, rather than a capital sugar hit at the front that will leave council in 20 or 30 years' time saddled with the full cost of subsidisation of social units. So I think there's a better way to do this, and I'll be proposing my amendment if this fails.
Councillor Hancock.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I won't be supporting this. Effectively, this is actually option 3, which is certainly not recommended by officers. I think very clearly in our city we have a very high need for social housing, and that was very clearly articulated before in terms of the numbers that were provided. I think the main reason for my resistance of this is that it actually, option 1 actually de-risks the risk around option 3, which is that we actually can't really anticipate what the market's receptiveness to a mixed social housing and private market deal might look like. So for those reasons, I won't be supporting this, and I'll be supporting the first recommendation. Thank you.
Councillor Fitzgerald, you were in and... Councillor Fitzgerald.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I'm at 50-50 on the amendments, which is why I wanted to talk with Bryce, the officer, about the council's definition of social housing. We've heard subsidised, we've heard non-subsidised. At the end of the day, subsidised or non-subsidised is about affordability. We might want to skirt around it and call it something different, but there's social housing, there's affordable housing, there's public housing. As I mentioned, the public housing model is state-owned, so we can push that aside because we're not state-owned. We've got an absolute need in the city. We've heard from the officers a number of 500 and 270 odd as homeless. But we've also got a state agency, Kāinga Order, who are in the process of planning for 300 new builds of social housing. They're currently in construction of 278. So there are other providers in the market that are also stepping into this space. An opportunity exists for this chamber to look at it differently and not take on the responsibility, but that sits with the entire community, if not the entire country. Which is why I wanted to make sure that joint venture as an option be considered to go forward. And the reason I put that up there is because I work in that space now, both with the iwi hat on, and we're doing 24 medium density units in Ranfurly Street for affordable rentals. For Te Tihi Ruahine, we're doing affordable home ownership programs alongside the likes of Homes for People. There are multiple other providers in the city who would jump at the opportunity to participate in this discussion as well. And I'll just leave it at that. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Right of reply to you, Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. It has come back to me what I wanted to mention earlier, and that is that the options in the paper outlined, option 1 meets our goal 3, option 2 meets goal 1, but option 3 is the only one that meets goal 1 and 3 of our strategic goals as a council. And so for that reason, I think it is more aligned with our overall goals to progress option 3. The other reason that I think it would be financially prudent for us to consider this option is that we've got 14 million budgeted for social housing, and we've got 4.56 million from the what? Better Off funding, that's what it's called. I was trying to remember what it was called. So that's 18.5 million. These options in front of us are 15 to 30 million. We've got a big shortfall. Is anyone thinking about how we meet that big shortfall? I think it's a part of our role to think about how we're meeting that shortfall. And I'm not hearing from anyone so far that's talking about what the plan is to meet that $11.5 million shortfall. So from my perspective, progressing option 3 does not hand it over to a developer. We can still be in control of how we develop those units. I think in terms of what's good for social housing is good for market. What is good in terms of accessible units, I don't think we should be building 2 different types, one for market and one for social. You know, if the gold standard is to have accessibility, that should be included in our social housing, and it should be included in any other housing that we develop. The other thing that I just want to pick up on that Councillor Wood mentioned was that he thought that adding some unsubsidised would offset that cost to council. I think what we heard from Bryce's response to my question was that the mix of unsubsidised and subsidised housing currently in council still only contributes 20% towards the cost of that. People, we need to think of what a sustainable way forward is. Yes, I'm totally aligned with wanting to develop social housing. But if we're going to look at the long term for this and how we replicate this model going forward, we've got to think about how we pay for it. So for those reasons, I'd really urge you to support this option, which does provide some level of optionality. I asked the officer if that risk of us being, it being unknown as to whether the market would be receptive to that, whether that would be mitigated through us keeping some optionality, and he agreed that possibly it would. So if we build units that can be sold, but then they don't sell, we can still let them out in either an unsubsidised or subsidised way. It keeps the options open, and that's what I'm trying to do in progressing this amendment today. So I really urge you to consider those things.
All right, thank you, councillor. You've got your hand up, councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Just to point out under Standing Order 2.13.7 for right of reply of movers of motions or amendments, that the mover of an amendment must confine themselves to answering previous speakers and not introduce any new matters.
Okay, thank you for letting me know that. We will vote. Thank you. And that has failed, 5 votes for and 9 against. So now we will go back to that. Sorry, we've got some technology's gone wrong. That is the correct one there. We'll sort out what's gone on there. Apologies. So, councillors, we'll continue with the substantive. We'll do 1A to E, and then we'll come back to the others separately. So, those that haven't spoken to the substantive, Councillor Wood.
So, Mr Mayor, I'll move my amendment now, shall I?
Yes, you can.
I just want to quickly ask, given Councillor Johnson seconding the substantive, do I need an alternative seconder? Or can, yes? All right. I'd like to move an amendment to add an additional subclause 1F that the design options include at least one option with a mix of subsidised and non-subsidised social housing. I'll look to the floor for a seconder, Councillor Bowen. I appreciate the sentiment of what Councillor Naylor and Councillor Mikela were trying to do. Councillor Naylor, to your point you made in your leader's reply, my understanding of his answer was that our subsidised rentals only account for 20% of the actual cost, not including our non-subsidised rentals. But either way, that's a question of the mix of how much subsidised versus non-subsidised we have, and that's what we have control over in this development. So I want to lay out the benefits of having a mix. First is operating sustainability, is that if we, and I'm not setting a number now that we do 1/3 non-subsidised and 1/3 subsidised, but whatever it may be, it will help cover the costs of the long-term operating of subsidised rental accommodation. It's a mechanism we already have within council. It services a different layer of the market than what purely social housing does. I said on the campaign trail, and I say it now, we have to pull different levers to support all people in our community, and part of the reason we have such a large number of people looking for social housing is because every layer of the market is failing. Private ownership is failing, rentals are failing, and that's what's driving people down into social and into emergency housing. And so if you can't find a market rental, say you come, you're a refugee, you may not have a history of renting in the community and you're unable to access a rental, that's part of what our non-subsidised social housing offers, is they give people an opportunity in the door to develop a tenant history to enable them to access that private rental market. And so a person such as that, if they are unable to access a private rental, they then may be left with no other option but to look for social housing or emergency housing, despite the fact that they may be able to pay a market rental. So what this does is provides another layer of support to people in the community to help, A, prevent people from needing as many people from needing social housing, but B, to help cover the cost of what we're trying to do. It also helps meet the different ability needs of our community, because as Councillor Barrett quite wisely asked in his questions, if we have 2 or 3 levels of units, that may not be suitable for somebody, or for our traditional tenant, who may be somebody who's over the age of 65 on a community services card or on a disability card, where they may not have, or they may have accessibility issues for higher level units. And so this would mean we could make our floor level units those that are for our community service card holders and our seniors, and then provide units perhaps for people who are more abled on levels 2 and 3. So I believe this is a sensible way of helping A, ensure long-term sustainability of this project, or at least going some way towards long-term sustainability, even if it moved the dial from 20% of cost being covered to 50% of cost being covered. May not do everything, but it will certainly help make sure that councils in the future are able to develop more housing rather than just using rates to service the housing that currently exists. But more than that, it gives us more options for the project. I want to make a few general comments on this stage, that if we go with option 2A, lower density and central space, my expectation will be that we have apartment style and unit style housing. I don't want to see any one level units on this development. We have a very low amount of land here. If we're going to provide land in the middle, which I believe we probably should, given the size of it, I'd like to see a mix of 2 and 3 bedroom units. If we look at the floor areas, so Papuia Place, 1 bedroom units are about 80 square metres. The floor areas in the design proposed are anywhere between 130 to 235 square metres. So that's more 3 to 5 bedroom homes than 1 to 2 bedroom homes. So that certainly gives us the opportunity to put more people or more dwellings onto that site. And in fact, based on those floor areas, it says we'd have 26 dwellings under option 2A, or 35 dwellings under option 2B. So with the 26 dwellings at 2 to 3 levels, that would give us, if we united it, between 52 and 78 units, which I believe is a good outcome. If we were to go with 35 dwellings, if we went between 2 and 3 levels, that would give us 70 to 105 units. So I would really encourage us, as we go through the design phase, to look at that apartment style housing where we have different people on different layers, because that would get the best utilisation of the land rather than simply one layer. So, look, in general, I think this is a sensible way in which we can help cover some of the costs. Also, down the track, if we wanted to look toward a partner in development, having some form of return on some of the units may open that door, I'm not sure. This also isn't settling us into having to do this. This is simply saying that at least one of the options that come back to us includes a mix of subsidised and non-subsidised for our consideration. If it turns out that a mix of subsidised and non-subsidised isn't going to work, if there's a social cohesion issue, if there's issues around design, well, we'll deal with that when we get to that stage. But this is giving us the option so that we can see what it would look like, and also give us the financials to come back to us. So look, I hope you'll support this amendment and the overall resolution that the Mayor is proposing. Thank you.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a very brief comment to follow on is just that this, Councillor Wood is not proposing revolution here. This is what the officer had indicated would be part of the mix anyway. This is just tidying up some admin to ensure that that comes back to us as part of the options that we can consider later on. So I'm really happy to support it as just a pragmatic, sensible inclusion in that wider suite of recommendations. Thank you.
Councillor Finlay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No, I'll wait for the stand if you don't mind.
Councillor Johnson.
Just talking to the amendment. Yeah, so I think that this is just a sensible clarification of what we want to see come back. It's not anything different than what we already do. It's just at the moment our non-subsidised social housing is clustered in a particular area and our subsidised social housing is clustered in other areas. We haven't at the moment got a kind of a bunch of houses together that combine the two. But nevertheless, if we are looking at 2 and 3 storey dwellings, which I think we should be doing in terms of maximising the yield from the space that we've got, it may well be that the higher levels are more suitable for people who would normally be accommodated in a non-subsidised social housing. So I just think that this is a sensible additional clarification for officers on what we want to see come back. Thank you.
Online, Councillor Zabellan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I'm also very happy to support this, and I'll thank the councillor for bringing it. I think it's a good distinction to make between the subsidised and unsubsidised, and to clarify what we'd like to see come back. I recently attended the Housing Advice Centre AGM, and less recently the Renters Forum from Manawatu Tenants Union, and it's a really clear need that's coming out, and that there is a pocket of vulnerable people that's starting to grow quite quickly, of people experiencing hard barriers to finding even social housing. Excuse me. And that's growing, and these groups are now starting to talk not just a housing crisis or a renting crisis, but now a room crisis. So it's moving much faster than we can respond. So I think that being really specific about the types of housing that we provide, and trying to maybe branch out with or specify what types of things we can offer is really good. So I'm happy to support, and thank you to the councillor for raising it. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, we'll get the screen back up. So, councillors, I'll come back to you, Councillor Wood, if you'd like it. No, thank you. I appreciate that. So we've got the amendment there around design options to include a mix of subsidised and non-subsidised social housing. Okay, we will vote, please, on the amendment. 1F. And that is passed. 12 votes for, 2 against. Right, so that will change the substantive now. So we'll now have 1B, 1C, 1D, and 1E. Okay. E, I'm just looking at the seconder, has options developed for 1 and 2 bedroom dwellings. Would you be happy to open that up to 1, 2 and 3? Oh, sorry. Sorry.
Yeah, I think that's fine.
All right. So I'm just going to keep the options open there, councillors. I think, again, I'm a realist. I've heard some of the comments, and I'd have to say I agree with them as well. So after debate, so what we've got now is 1B, C, D, E, and F. I'm not going to speak any further to those. Is there anybody else that would like to? Councillor Denison.
Thank you. My comments are really around the lack of financial modelling in this report, and being here today trying to model off decisions without understanding where the additional capital is going to come from the different density models, from anywhere from 15 to 30 million. We've got a $14 million provision. There seems to me quite a large gap. Then I consider some of the responses around the OPEX, understanding it's costing 30 to 40,000 per annum per unit. And using those figures on my own back of an envelope calculations are hundreds of thousands of dollars of OPEX that we're going to need to model into our ongoing budgets. which we've blind to here because the report doesn't mention it. Didn't even mention it. Come through questions. And when we're talking about multi-million dollar and hundreds of thousands of dollars of OPEX, those figures should be in a housing report, not the idealism of this design that looks like this or that. It's the dollars and cents. We've got too much around the touchy-feely side of social housing, not the actual where the dollars hit the road side of housing and how we make this work. That's my first real frustration around this, and everything else that sits below it is just absolutely, I can't even believe we're considering it without actually understanding that clearly. That's not just for our decision making, that's for the fairness of every other ratepayer that we represent out there that's got a commitment going forward that we don't even know how we're going to fit into our long-term planned budgets. Somewhat absurd. And I did have the feeling of wanting to lie this on the table. I've missed that opportunity. I don't want to do that. I don't believe it's got the support around this room. But I want you to think about those type of things until we have that tabled. How can we make decisions around this stuff? Really? And so today, mine is a protest abstention vote. That's the reasons for it. If you've got the will in your own mind to think that this is a great idea and run through without that information, which I think is fundamental, I think this is a significant decision, you go for it. But I'm doing my vote as an abstention, as a pure protest that I don't feel I've got the information to make this decision today. Thank you.
Councillor Fitzgerald.
Well, thanks, Mr. Mayor. I certainly echo and would support Councillor Dennison's thinking around the costs. But I would like to further propose another amendment or motion, or whatever you call it, to call it 1G, and it'll be seconded by Councillor Naylor. And it's to have the inclusion and the thinking and the options to make further decisions and considerations around joint ventures, which the Mayor has not included in the substantive recommendations. And just additional recommendation, yep, so we'll call it 1G.
So, Councillor, we'll take it at the end, because actually it's an additional, it's not an amendment, because it was already listed there in 4, but yes, happy to take that at the end. Right, we'll go back to Councillor Finlay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A little bit along the lines of Councillor Dennison and the costings. I've always questioned costings of social housing in the City Council. Back in 2001, the organisation I was working with at that time saw there was a problem with more people living on the street and more homeless people. So they created an organisation called Shepherd's Rest Trust, and we took on 4 properties totaling 70 bedrooms, and we filled those 70 bedrooms within 2 months. There was a need then, and there's, well, today the need is phenomenal, as you can see. That organisation still continues under the name of Legacy Housing, and still there's a waiting list to get into that. With 273 people homeless in our city, in this country, and we say we're a first world country? Really? That many homeless people, and we have to worry about funds. I'm in an organisation called Abbeyfield, taking on older people into accommodation. That is full and with a waiting list. More and more older people are in a situation where they're renting in New Zealand, and in this city are paying $400 to $500 a week rent coming out of their super. They are desperate for other accommodation. I've got older people who are begging for 1 or 2 bedroom houses where they can get into because they cannot afford the accommodation they have at the moment. Just ask Councillor Dennison how his employer handles them. I'm sending older people to him all the time. We desperately need 1 and 2 bedroom houses in this city at reasonable rental. I go back to my original statement. The costings of our social housing, I've asked to see that for years, but there's always a reason for it not coming through. Part of this money from the social housing has to go into look after this building, to pay our wages, etc., etc. But it's not real cost of social housing. Social housing, the cost is the amount of looking after those properties, not the other support networks like our wages and everything else. We've really seriously got to look at what we're talking about here. If we don't do something, it's not going to get better. 2 years ago, I asked what the waiting list was. It was 400. Today, it's 570. It's not getting better. We can't carry on talking about it. We've got to do something about it. Because it's getting desperate out there when people are living on the street. My last statement is this. Our organisation helped put a woman, 72 years old, who was living in a doorway in this city into a legacy housing last month. 72 years old, living on the street in a doorway because her landlord had put her out of accommodation. And we say we don't need social housing, well.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm a little bit stunned. I don't think anyone at this table is saying that we don't need social housing. I'm not sure who Councillor Finlay is listening to, but it's certainly not my colleagues that I am sitting at the table with. I think there's a very big commitment to social housing from this council, and I'm very proud of that. The other comment, I just want to quickly address that Councillor Finlay made, that he's been asking for the cost of social housing for years. Someone who has sat at this table for as many years as Councillor Finlay should know that the appropriate way for us to get information is to ask officers in the form of a recommendation, and I'm really pleased that officers do provide answers to the questions that we ask through the proper means. So if Councillor Finlay would like that information, I would encourage him to put it as a recommendation, and I'm confident that staff will provide that. So sorry, just to come back to the substantive, I share some of Councillor Denison's concerns around the costings. However, the next actions that are outlined in this paper is that should Council agree on option 1, this is in 7.3, that further financial information will be provided in a subsequent report as designs progress. So I would have preferred some of that now, yes, but I also realise that we have to take this one step at a time, and that information will be provided in the future report. Because there is so much uncertainty about how we will fund this, I think it's really important that we keep the options of partnerships open, and for that reason I'm really happy to recommend, second the recommendation that Councillor Fitzgerald is putting, which is outlined in our papers as recommendation 4. Until such time as we have a better understanding of the costings and further information around the designs, we definitely need to keep the partnership options open. So I'd urge you to support that recommendation also. I've just spoken to both for the ease of time. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Very happy to second these recommendations, and I'm very supportive of us going forward with a social housing model for this redevelopment. When you think about how we've got this piece of land, it's a piece of land that's been in public ownership for very many years. It was leased out to the bowling club who surrendered their lease to us, and with it being public land, I think it's very appropriate that we do public good with it. And not consider selling it off or, dividing up in terms of private sections and so on. So that's the first thing. We need to think about where the land has come from that's enabling us to do this. The second thing is, because we own the land, the cost of the development here is a lot less than if we were to look at doing social housing in another location. And so that means that the 14 million that we have in our budget plus the 4.5 million, which makes 18.5, Councillor Dennison, not 14 million, the 18.5 million that we have budgeted for this can actually go further than if we had to spend some of that money on buying land. So it's good value to do social housing on this land because we own it already. Secondly, I think we have to remember that what we're doing here is creating a community. It's not just about individual units and numbers and all the rest of it. It's about social well-being for members of our community who have got no place to call home at the moment. And if other members think that's touchy-feely, well, I'm quite happy to own the touchy-feely around this council table, Councillor Dennison. We're making communities. We need to consider the amenity, the social cohesion, the mix of tenants to make this a success. And that's why I'm supportive of having a green space in the middle. Yes, we might be able to get an increased number of units, but we have to think about the quality of life for people living in them. And we also have to think about the quality of life for neighbours. And it's well shown that if you're able to look out on some green or some blue, be that the sea or a park, that your mental health is much improved. And so I think having a central green space area for people to look out on is definitely well worth including. I fully agree that it's not just down to us to do social housing. There are many other providers in this city. And yes, they're building houses, some of them. And yes, they're working away at the ever-increasing list of people that need affordable housing. This will just be a small contribution from council. It's not the whole thing by any means. It's a small contribution. And it's one that our residents ask us for. Every single year that I've sat around this table for annual plan submissions and long-term plan submissions, we've had multiple submissions from people asking us to not only remain in our social housing portfolio, but to expand it. And councillors that have been here for a few years will remember this is an every year thing that we're asked to do more. So I don't think that there's an issue with going forward with this programme of social housing at Summerhayes Street. I guess the final thing I want to say is that we've got a good track record in terms of being able to deliver these sorts of things successfully. Papiara Place has been delivered extremely well. It's been delivered within budget, and it's also been delivered, apart from the community centre, which has just gone a little over time, but up until then, all the units were delivered on time as well. So council has good track record, officers know what they're doing, we have good relationships with contractors in the community, and I think that it's a very low risk option for council to choose to do social housing here. And finally, I'm just going to bring you back to the need again, councillors. I mean, Councillor Finlay spoke very well about the need, but the need is huge in the community. I don't know if you walk around the CBD very much, but I do, and I'm seeing people sleeping in doorways. I'm also seeing councillors complaining about people sleeping in doorways. That's fine, you can complain about it, but you have to be able to try and contribute to a solution. And this is one contribution that we can make. So I do hope that this will be a unanimous vote in support of this. I think Councillor Naylor made some very good comments about the fact that more detailed financial modelling will be coming in later papers once we've indicated how we want to go forward with this. And we'll be looking at how it can be delivered as efficiently as possible. So I look forward to your support. Thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and colleagues. Just to speak briefly and strongly in support of the package that's in front of us here, just a couple things I wanted to highlight that has particularly spoken to me. The first is around ensuring that we do follow through on 1C in terms of those sustainable building practices. Those have a lot to offer in terms of the quality of life for those living in those units, as well as the ongoing operating costs, which we've obviously heard some concerns expressed around. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what comes back through that particular angle. We also quite often talk as a council about density done well and ensuring that density is done well, and that's why I'm strongly in support of that green space. I think this has obviously a great function for the individuals that again will be residing in this area, but I think it's a really great way for us to be leading by example and giving an opportunity for developers to see how they can do great things in the heart of our city to really improve the housing density and also get some good green space living outcomes there. Like Councillor Wood, very keen to see this go into some apartment style and 2 and 3 level explorations. Would be quite disappointed if all we delivered here was single level, given the proximity to services and the huge need for housing we can build up into that airspace and make good use of it. And finally, a comment on cost, because there has been a little bit of commentary around cost, some of it quite energetic. The only thing more costly than providing social housing is not providing it.
Deputy Mayor.
Tēnā koe, Mr Mayor, o te rā tēnā tātou. I too acknowledge my colleagues who have spoken before me, and the need for social housing is great. So great that we are compelled to make sure that we're part of the solution and not part of the problem. I think we've had a significant amount of discussion about the benefits of social housing, and I do acknowledge also some of the comments around perhaps having fellow providers offering offsetting costs and so forth. But what I wanted to talk about was the design in terms of, I too agree with the green space in the middle. I think there's significant research out there to say how beneficial it is for social cohesion, for healthier places. And with regards to community cohesion, there's the opportunities for community gardens, for intergenerational interaction, young kids playing on there, being out there with their grandparents or their parents. And like Councillor Barrett had said, sustainable building practices are significant. And like what Councillor Wood had mentioned, talking about there will be making consideration for those who are older, who will need to be at ground level is significant. If they have that opportunity available to them and they can put in place spaces or widths so they can get a wheelchair in, we're likely to have those people being able to live there a lot longer and have a better quality of life than them settling in and then finding that they have those sort of health needs and then having to relocate again. So if we can get that right at the beginning, I think that's really important. It's sobering to hear about the 273 homeless people in Palmerston North, but that's growing too. And I support what Councillor Fitzgerald has said, that there are lots of other providers out there helping, and we're part of that. And I do think that if we could be having conversations with them, because I think we've got a joint responsibility within our community to make sure we look after all our people who need homes, safe, secure, and that they have a sustainability as well to live there and for the environment that we have create. And finally, I want to say Councillor Johnson was quite correct in saying this is building not just a physical space or place, but a community. Kia ora tātou.
Councillor Hancock.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm going to be very brief because there have been some very good comments made by various councillors before now. But I guess I'm going to support all of the recommendations that are up before us at the moment. And I think the key thing around here is the need of 570 people on the waiting list, and of course, as the Deputy Mayor mentioned, the number of people who are basically homeless in our city at the moment is unacceptable. Summerhays is actually an ideal location for social housing. particularly because of its proximity to amenities and also to public transport. And just to comment on Councillor Dennison's comments earlier on, I don't think there's anybody in this room actually that doesn't understand the fiscal implications of this, but we actually have a responsibility to all of our residents, and that includes people who are in need of social housing or some housing of any kind. I'll speak in support of 2A in terms of the green space, because the quality of housing is actually very, very important. It's important to social well-being and also to social cohesion. And if we don't understand what social cohesion is, then we need to actually go and revisit that and actually understand why that is so important to the outcomes across a lot of areas within our community. So I guess to conclude, I think in terms of how we build this, poor investment will lead to poor social outcomes. So the quality of what we actually produce in Summerhays is very important, and I urge you all going forward to make sure that we look for the very best quality outcomes. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to wrap up, I think, by saying I'm really comfortable with where this has landed. I think at this stage it is appropriate for us to be aspirational for the outcomes that we're seeking for our community, and the 1 A, B, C, D and onwards, I think sets out a really good path towards that for us, but recognising that this is still early days in this process, and that was captured well in the officer's report, which talked about the next actions of a subsequent report with detailed options for delivery, including the potential for partnerships to come back for us to think about further. And the Deputy Mayor referenced the potential for partnerships in this space. I think that there are lots of different ways we could do this. The most important thing is that we do this, and that's what the decision is today, that we go ahead and think about the kind of community we want this to be for all of our residents. And I know we were all taken aback by that 273 number today, 273 people without security of a roof over their heads. It's quite staggering. And I know we've all seen that become more visible over the last couple of years particularly. There's always been an element, but I know it's more visible because one of my children asked me about it the other day. I said, Mum, have we got homeless people in Palmerston North? They've never asked me that before. It's more visible than it ever has been, and the onus is on us to do something about it, maybe in a way that we haven't before. I've always been proud of our approach to social housing in this council. We bucked the trend right from the beginning of this conversation, and I think we can continue to do that sensibly, sustainably, practicably, but we still need to do it, and I'd encourage us all to vote for that today. Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. Just very quickly, look, I think everyone's summed things up quite well, and on all sides, actually. I think social housing or providing housing has been one of it's one of our city's DNA traits. I mean, it's pretty well ingrained, and I don't think I'm hearing anybody saying they don't want to be involved in it. Look, I don't disagree with some of the commentary around the financial modelling or lack of it. It's a very true comment. And those that have been here a little bit longer can recall Councillor Jim Jeffries bringing this whole conversation up, and probably where Councillor Finlay was going with some of his comments earlier. I don't think they have been answered, some of those questions. But in saying that, I don't want to go down a rabbit hole with that. I do think there is an appetite in this city to support social housing, and possibly even a level of subsidisation. I say that without a huge lot of knowledge, but we will certainly hear about it, I'm sure. But the officers, I think, are hearing that we need to get some numbers around this. And if I could just say, there's two conversations going on here around the cost modelling. There's this costs around this capital build, and then I think there's a very different discussion, and not to get confused, is around the ongoing OPEX of social housing. So let's not try and confuse them all. This is around, are we going to build this? And yes, we can have another conversation, which may need to be a separate one around the ongoing OPEX. And does it wash its face? No. Let's be really honest, it doesn't. Can we get close to that? I'm unsure, but that's another, I think that's another conversation for another day. This is about Summer Haze. Do we want to do this? Do we want to do it relatively well? I think we do need to control some of the narrative there, but I'm in full support, obviously, as the mover of A to F. Am I right with A to F? Yeah. So we're just voting on number 1, A to F, and then we'll get very quickly on to the last couple. Are we going to do 2 and now? Okay, all right. I'm just getting told we're doing 1A to F, and I'm quite okay with that. 2A, because a lot of you have commented on that already, and 3. Okay, so we're going to vote now. That is passed, 14 votes for, none against. Okay, we now come to the final additional. Okay, everyone has voted for that, thank you. We now come to the additional number 4, and that be noted that should the council look to deliver housing at 1719 Summerhays Street as a joint venture, the designs are likely to require negotiation with any potential development partner. So that's moved by you, Councillor Fitzgerald, and I'll go to you now.
Oh, thank you, Mr Mayor. It basically speaks for itself, team, but I do recall at the workshop, one of the questions that we put to the council officers was to consider partnerships with outside organisations, and I think to leave this out of today's decision-making is perhaps a missed opportunity. So it's just asking us for that consideration. Let's have a look at what those joint venture relationships can look like. Whilst I have some experience in there, I appreciate that not all the councillors at the table do. So it's about bringing that information so that everybody can make an informed decision about whether or not joint venture partnerships with council is a place that we want to go to. Thank you.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I want to speak on this because what the report said on this topic troubled me. It talks about private joint ventures and commercial partnerships, either as investors or potentially as skilled developers. I don't feel that's the intention of what Councillor Fitzgerald is trying to do here. What we're trying to do here is look at community housing partnerships and social housing partnerships, not a private capital investor who's going to seek a return out of a development like this. If we were, say, redeveloping the CAB and we were looking to do a 50-year long-term lease of a new build, that would be a commercial joint venture. What we're looking for here is community housing partnership. And so I might suggest or see if the mover would consider changing the terminology from joint venture to community housing and social housing partnerships, just to be very clear here that what we're looking for and what we expressed, I felt quite clearly in the workshop, was that there could be an opportunity here to develop or to partner with a community housing provider for the provision of some of this housing. I've seen in our upcoming committee work schedules an update on our community housing partnership program is coming. I've seen as we go through the long-term plan, years 2 and 3, we're looking at developing a fund there, but we also don't have to wait until that work's done in 2 or 3 years' time. We've got an opportunity here now. We have a range of different needs in the community, whether the Nuvaka Trust, whether Homes for People, whether Te Tihi, whether other groups, we could provide a section or 2 sections or whatever it may be as a part of this design for them to provide for their unique section of the social and community housing market. I'd be interested in looking at that option. What I'm not interested in is bringing in a commercial development partner who's seeking a return on their investment out of social housing, because as we know clearly today, there's not going to be a return on investment. We are not going to find an investor who wants to make a negative 8% return on their investment. So the spirit of this is around community housing partnership, not commercial. So if that was able to be changed, that would be, yeah. Oh, in fact, miraculously while I'm speaking, it already has. So thank you, councillors.
Councillor Naylor.
Oh, I think it's
fairly well implied that we've changed that to reflect that I think the intent in wanting to see this included is simply to keep our options open. And in the next actions, it did state that if we were to pursue partnerships, that this would be provided in a subsequent report. So this is really the opportunity to seek that further information about who the partnerships could be with, what that might look like, and keeping those options open. So I think it's pragmatic to keep that included at this stage of the process.
Okay, no need, let's vote. Thank you. That is passed, 14 votes for and none against. Thank you. All right, we will break for a late morning tea. I apologise there, but it was an important conversation. So we're back in the chamber at 25 to 12. Thank you.
separately, and upon completion of that, then the mayor will return to this area. I'm now going to ask the Chief Executive Officer to speak to this. Thank you.
Kia ora, Madam Chair. Just for councillors' information, I'll just add a little bit in relation to 1.3, because I did have a query about when the invitation was received and why this ended up on the council agenda in this month rather than perhaps last month. So we did actually receive the invitation on the 14th of August. RSVP was by the 1st of September. However, the Mayor hadn't decided that he was attending by those timeframes, so had decided afterwards, after the RSVP date and after the time had lapsed before getting it onto the September agenda rather than here. So I'm happy to take any other questions that councillors might have on this.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Thanks, Wade, for that. I had a couple of questions. Just first on that 1.3, where it says the Mayor's gone ahead and paid for this travel personally. Can you just confirm that was without any expectation that council would reimburse?
Correct.
Thank you. 2.6, talk about, there's the elected member expenses policy. Says we might pay for things which may be of benefit to Palmerston North. Could you say more about how this may be of benefit to Palmerston North?
Yes, through the Chair. I think that the council has contributed to funds towards the museum in the past, through terms of a donation and the like in that as well. As you're aware, we do have a very long and proud connection with military, defence in the city and the like in that as well. So there is those sorts of things that I think are being seen, being present at such a significant event goes towards that contribution, or that us being part of, Defence City, those sorts of things.
Okay, I'm maybe still not quite getting how that's of benefit to Palmerston North, but I'll maybe come back to that in comments. And then the last thing I wanted to ask about was funding coming from the Arts, Culture and Heritage budget, rather than, say, international relations. Mm-hmm. Why? I know it says in the report, given the city's link to military heritage, but I'm not seeing a link to any of the purposes of our arts, culture and heritage funding beyond that. So why that decision rather than international relations?
Yeah, so through the Chair, was having a look at, it doesn't necessarily fit in the international relations budget, and given the fact that that budget's set aside for delegations and the like going to our sister cities and the like. So the connection for me was that I thought that it fitted much better with heritage and military heritage in particular. So hence the reason for utilising, putting it in that budget.
Okay. Thank you. I haven't got any more questions, Deputy Mayor. I'll just signal that I'd be looking to move 1B, the leave of absence option. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Bowen. We have Councillor Zeblin. We'll move over to her. Thank you. Kia ora, Councillor Zeblin.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Thank you, Wade. Can you confirm for me how much is the maximum amount of reimbursement being sought by the Mayor?
It was the maximum amount that would be looking up to approximately $13,000.
Thank you. And how much was our donation to this Liberation Museum?
What
was the amount of that?
Through the Chair, as I understand it, I think I recall a figure of about 5,000.
Great. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Kia ora, Councillor Zeblin.
Moving to councillor Naylor, thank you.
Thank you. On page 71 in the papers, the 2 days on the Tuesday the 10th and Wednesday the 11th, the program's outlined. I'm just wanting to understand what the purpose of the travel between the 11th and the 17th is. Those 6 days, obviously there's a day for travelling, but aside from that, what's the main purpose for that other time that
Through the chair, I don't have the answers to that, or for what the travel would be on the outside of those dates for the agenda. As I understand it, it's getting there and then getting back.
6 days to get back?
Through the chair, I don't have any other details on that.
And in 3.2, one of the options is covering the accommodation, meals and internal transport estimate of $4,000. I'm just wondering what period is that just for those 2 days on the 10th and the 11th, or is that accommodation and meals for the other part of the travel, which is unknown to what the purpose is?
Through the chair, I understand it's for the entire time that he's away.
It's for the entire time? Okay. I'll leave it there, thank you. But also just indicate that I'm happy to second the motion for the leave of absence that Councillor Bowen has indicated.
Thank you, councillor Naylor. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Thank you, Wade. Just want to make sure my understanding is clear. From looking at the schedule, the Mayor won't be speaking on behalf of council or giving a keynote address, or he'll just be one of the attendees. He's not going to be doing anything in particular.
Through the chair, that's as I understand it.
All right, thank you.
With no further questions, I'm looking to see if we have a mover and a seconder for the substantial. Councillor Naylor. And do we have a seconder? And Councillor Bowen. Councillor Naylor is the mover and of the swapped. Councillor Bowen is the mover, Councillor Naylor is the seconder. Thank you. And are you moving, and also for number 2? Okay. Just for number 1. Okay. We'll go straight to comments. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Bowen.
Deputy Mayor, for that and for allowing us to move that the grant a leave of absence for the Mayor for this. Absolutely no surprise that the Mayor would love to attend this. I think we all know it's strongly aligned with his personal interests and passions of history and military history in particular, and he's been a huge advocate for that for our city. And as Chair of Culture and Sport this term and of Arts, Culture and Heritage in previous terms, I very much value the passion and dedication he brings to that interest. But in this situation, I'm putting that to one side because in my view, a $13,000 10-day trip to France is disproportionate to the $5,000 grant that we gave to that museum, which the Mayor advocated strongly for during the hearings process where that came forward. I'm very happy for him to attend. I think a leave of absence is absolutely appropriate, and actually glad that the Mayor is taking a longer time so that that journey isn't absolutely exhausting, because it is, going all the way to Europe is a big ask. But I don't think that it's an appropriate use of council funds to support this trip, where the balance of benefit, to my mind, is largely personal. And I think we can all look at situations where we have had the opportunity to travel somewhere. And I do remember in a previous debate, the Mayor saying to me that we can all get invitations to go to things in our official capacity. That is actually not difficult to achieve. But where does the balance of benefit lie? And in this case, today, I feel the balance of benefit is strongly with the two ratepayers who would benefit from this fund and not the rest of the ratepayers who would pay for it. So I would ask you to support the leave of absence with our blessing, but not ratepayer funding. Thank you.
Councillor Naylor. Oops, sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm also really happy to second granting a leave of absence. I think anyone in busy, demanding roles, such as the role of the Mayor, should take time out to have rest and recreation and sometimes even a holiday. And for that reason, I'm very comfortable with the Mayor having some time off. However, the process that is in front of us of seeking some reimbursement for costs that have already been paid, in good faith, the decision was made by the Mayor and the Mayoress to have this trip, whether reimbursement was going to happen or not. And in terms of operating in good faith and a good decision-making process, I think if there was to be funds sought towards this trip, that should have been requested prior to the decision. I'm concerned that the $4,000 for accommodation and meals covers a time period of 10 days, of which we can only see the purpose of that over 2 days, at a time when in France it's the Rugby World Cup quarterfinals that week. I'm sure things will be accommodation, etc., will be much more expensive. I'm really also concerned about the perception of this decision from the public, that the lines are really blurred as to the overall purpose of this trip. I don't know what's happening the other 8 days. The Chief Executive is not aware of that. But it could be perceived as being a holiday with a small 1 or 2 day thing in the middle thrown in for the purposes of getting some funds. And for that reason, I think it's important that we protect the mana of the role of the Mayor and keep the lines clean in terms of decision-making and funding, especially when we're talking about ratepayers' money.
Thank you, Councillor Naylor. Oh, Councillor Dennison, thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I would like to acknowledge the opportunity to associate with the opening, understanding we're a military city. I think it's just a scale of recognising that portion of the trip that's been requested. We did make a contribution, and I think our association with it does have some relevance, although minor for the amounts that have been requested. So if I'd like to put a notice of motion that if this, that hasn't been moved, has it, the other option, is I'd like to have a consideration of 2 being moved, and option 2, but of a sum of $2,000 is the way I'd move that for consideration. So that we reimburse the travel and associated costs for an option 2 of a 2A or amended 2 of $2,000 for consideration. Look for a seconder.
Kia ora, Councillor Dennison. That, for clarification, that would be option 3, agreed contribution. And you've asked if there would be a seconder to that. Councillor Arnott? Okay. So we'll leave that to the side and we'll go back to the previous motion that was passed by, moved by Councillor Bowen and seconded by Councillor Naylor. We will vote on that. Thank you. Oh, Councillor Bowen, right of reply? Thank you. Thank you, everyone. That is 12-0. So with that, the matter is closed. It should be 13 votes. We're missing. Oh. We'll Okay, so that's unanimous. Thank you, everyone, and we'll now just take a quick break and thank you, councillor Dennison. I'm just taking counsel on that.
Through the chair, I'll just give some clarification around this. Because you've granted the mayor a leave of absence, it means that he's now travelling not on council business. Therefore, agreeing to reimburse for travel or associated costs that's not in our policy.
Thank you for that clarification, Chief Executive. We'll close this now. Kia ora.
Kia ora, everybody. We'll move now to the late item. We'll get that through. So if I could perhaps ask Councillor Dennison to have a coffee next door or wherever.
But I take the report has been read. If there's any questions.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any questions? Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just given the response we had to the last item, does Councillor Dennison need to be requesting leave on council business under our policy?
I have delegation to...
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Just my question relates to the recommendation that's there is covering up to $1,000 of travel, but in the paper it talks about estimated cost of travel is approximately $2,000, and so I'm just wanting to understand the inconsistency.
I guess I'm happy to just have a contribution rather than a estimated cost covered, so it's more moderated. So that was intentional. Thank you.
Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thanks, Mr Mayor. Yeah, thanks, Vaughan. Just really a question just in terms of, just some clarification in terms of what's the anticipated, I suppose, level of business at both Mehara and also the IPU?
Yep, thank you for the question. So I've been in liaison with the International Relationship Manager who's making the connections. It would be more ceremonial as the suggestion, as far as meeting and maybe having a light lunch or hospitality tour of the facilities, and I've extended the openness to tour one of their parks that are nearby or something of significance of a civic project, and so yet to come back, but it'd be of that type of nature, with some opportunity for a gift to be given to signify the visit.
Councillor Hancock.
So is that anticipated that's going to be ceremonial for the IPU? What about the sister city visit? Are they
both very similar outline as far as meeting, having conversation. I have mentioned there'll be a need for translation, so a translator would be present, and then around a tour of each facility of IPU and obviously the council facility, and then an openness to visit a project or a park or something of that nature for some ongoing I guess, relationship building opportunities around that.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Naylor.
Sorry, I forgot to ask the second question, which was, do we have a sister city's budget and is there $1,000 available in that for this purpose? Because I think the report.
I'll go to the CE.
Through the chair, yes.
Okay. Thank you, councillor. Those are the questions done. So look, we have the resolution there that council agreed to cover up to $1,000 costs associated with Councillor Dennison's visit to Japan, and while he's there visiting our sister city of Mihara and Okayama, where IPU are head office or base is, in October, November 2023. I'm happy to move that. Look for a seconder. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Look, councillors, we haven't been in person as a governance team, or anybody hasn't been there for 4.5 years. So it is important that while the councillor's there carrying out some duties with New Zealand Softball, that he catches a train down the road to Mihara or Okayama first and then Mihara. The IPU one's quite important, I think. Yes, it is ceremonial, but as we know, Japan place a lot of basis on that. So I think it's quite timely, and we'll ensure that we have some letters and some correspondence and some small things to take for the council if this is successful. So thank you. Being no other comments, we will vote. Oh, sorry, councillor, you didn't come on.
Sorry, I was pondering. Because I think you make some good points there, Mr. Mayor, about the opportunity that is, of having Councillor Dennison in country and able to do this trip, and I don't disagree with those. But I do have a problem with the precedent that it sets, I suppose. Recently, in July, Councillor Johnson was in Europe and visited Le Quinoa, for example. Could she have asked for us to fund her train trip to that? We've all received the wisdom from Councillor Naylor's trip to Amsterdam in terms of the biking experience she had and brought that report back into this chamber. Would we be expected to contribute to that? And you might say, no, of course we wouldn't, that's ridiculous. And it might be ridiculous, but I don't think it's a lot more ridiculous than this. So I won't be supporting it. Thank you.
Okay, just before we go to vote, I think it just widens our knowledge of international relations is, and I think some of the comments there, I think this is the reason why we're doing it. Otherwise, we do go down some rabbit holes. I'll ask you to vote, please. And that has passed 8 votes for and 5 against. Thank you. All right, we'll move through now to number 9 on our order paper, which is page page 35. And this is, I'll invite officers up, Mike Moynihan, Group Manager of Three Waters, this is around the Reserve, wind farm, and the proposed change in purpose. Mike.
Good afternoon, Your Worship, and with permission I'd like to invite up Yvonne Evans and Cathy Deva Todd to the table. Yvonne is our expert consultant from the property group and Cathy's our in-house expert on land purpose change. So through the chair, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure, thank you.
Tēnā koutou koutou, ko Mike Moynihan ho. Good afternoon, Your Worship and Councillors. I'm pleased to present you this paper detailing a proposed change in land purpose for the Turitea Reserve Wind Farm. This is an administrative process to make clear the primary classification and purpose of parts of the reserve that the wind farm sits on. You might realise that land administration is not my core skill set, so I've brought along some experts to help me answer any questions, so I'm happy to take the paper as read. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Mike and team for being here to answer some questions. I suppose my questions relate more to potential opportunities around recreational access that might be able to be addressed or might not be through these changes. If we could get a bit of background around existing council resolutions in that regard and what options this might create for recreational access. I'm speaking specifically about walking and biking.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. I think the one thing I can say, and then I might hand over to colleagues, is that the changes in primary classification shouldn't have any implication on future land purpose in that area. This is simply to change the primary classification. Kathy, is there?
Great. So in terms of existing management plans for that reserve and the review of those management plans, could I understand where that's at?
Yeah, sure. So the Turitea Reserve Management Plan is on our agenda to sort of get to. I appreciate that there has been a slight delay, and there's been a couple of drivers for that delay. One of the main drivers is water reform. And the bill, the current bill that says that the entity and the landowner need to have a source water risk management plan in place. So the source water risk management plan will be part of that Turitea Reserve. So the two pieces of work, the Turitea Reserve Plan and the source water risk management plan, will almost need to dovetail to before we can progress that work.
Thanks. And any estimates in terms of timing of that?
Yeah, I've spoken to my staff today. We haven't got a deadline on the source water risk management plan, but we believe there's probably a 9 to 12 month lead time on getting that work completed.
And then subsequent to that, so in a year or two, we might see the reserve management plan coming to get its revision that's overdue at this point.
Yes. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
No other comments? Okay. Thank you. All right. We have a number of recommendations there, councillors. So, number one is around the council as the administrating body of the Turitea Reserve under the Reserves Act, approve the classification under section 16 of the Reserves Act. To bring it into the current legislation, and A is around section 1718, and the Mangahao Survey District, which is held in record of the title 48653, around the water supply. And number two, that council is again the administrating body of the Turitea Reserve under the Reserves Act, approve the change in classification under section 24 of the Act. And it's bringing in areas A, B, C, D on the draft. And I'm not going to read everything there, but purpose reserve is around renewable electricity generation, electricity transformation, water supply and protection of Indigenous flora and fauna to local purpose reserve, renewable electricity generation, electricity transmission and protection of Indigenous flora and fauna. And finally, and B, section 17 and 18 of the Mangahao Survey District is coming from local purpose reserve water supply to local purpose reserve, including renewable electricity generation, electricity transmission and protection of Indigenous flora and fauna. And number three, that council delegate authority to the Chief Executive to sign and publish the Gazette notices required to enact these recommendations. I'm happy to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Open it up for any commentary. There being none, we will vote, please. And that is passed 14 votes for, none against. Thank you. Okay, we move through to number 11, which is around our dog control, and I'll invite Aaron Thornton. Page 73 of your papers, councillors.
Kia ora koutou, Aaron Thornton, Acting Environmental Protection Services Manager. Please take the report as read. I'd like to start by offering a brief overview of the annual dog control report and current status for our animal management services. This will include some highlighting of key developments and challenges we've faced recently. Firstly, I must apologise for a point of statistical confusion on page 79 of the agenda. The number of dogs euthanased increased 118%. So that was 109 dogs for this year, 50 dogs for last year. This is an 8.5% increase when you take into context the total number of dogs impounded for the year. Over the past year, animal management team has undergone several significant changes. This includes secondment of the team leader to the Kautuia project over 12 months ago, appointment of a new kennel manager in late 2022, and the secondment of another team member to the Environmental Protection Services Manager role. We employed an experienced animal control officer on a 12-month fixed-term contract to backfill the staff secondments. Additional to this, an animal control officer is rostered to manage our pound duties. This arrangement includes backup support from our contractor to assist with these responsibilities. This has been due to an unforeseen absence of our current kennel manager. This has meant that the team have had to regularly take on a higher than usual workload due to resourcing. The good news is that this will be resolved in the coming weeks with the return of the team leader to a substantive role. Additionally, we'll be currently working through the kennel manager issue with a view to having this addressed by November. Although we are currently meeting key performance indicators, it's important to note that our service has shifted towards a more response-orientated approach. However, with the things I've just spoken about, we're on track to return to a more proactive-oriented service. The new shelter is rapidly taking shape with the entire animal management team scheduled to move in and be based at the new facility from February 2024. This will better enable monitoring of the dogs and remove the isolation that currently affects the kennel manager role. This will have a positive effect on their mental well-being and address staff security concerns that we currently have with our current pound. We've observed a rise in roaming dogs during the year. This has pushed up both the number of dogs impounded and in turn euthanisation rates, which have risen by 118%. Notably, this trend has been reported as being experienced by a number of other TAs throughout the country, and it is my belief that this may be attributed to various factors, such as surge in dog adoptions during lockdown. While this was positive in many ways, it also led to challenges as owners returned to their normal routines with cases of insufficiently socialised dogs escaping and causing issues. Furthermore, as you will see from the report, there's been a decrease in overall dog ownership in Palmerston North. This could possibly be due to dogs passing away without being replaced, owners relocating, or dogs being rehomed. Financial strain due to our current economic climate has also been cited as a reason for the decline in dog ownership. Barking complaints have also increased, possibly driven by the same factors contributing to the higher roaming complaints and impound numbers, including changes. These changes include daily routines and lack of socialisation. In our interactions with customers, we've observed a strong desire for quick solutions, which is entirely understandable. However, it's essential to remember that the legal requirements mandate comprehensive investigations before we can take any enforcement actions. To tackle this challenge, we provide education advice to both the dog owners and the complainants throughout the entire investigative process. This approach frequently results in mutually beneficial resolutions. In addition to these operational challenges, the recent resident survey results have highlighted areas for improvement. These include addressing the lack of awareness about available animal management services, improving communication between our officers and the community, and increasing public education outreach efforts. The Customer Experience Unit is currently working on a customer-centric initiative, starting with the business building services and then rolling out to environmental protection services. Our commitment to addressing these challenges remains strong. We understand the complexities of our work, which are compounded by legal constraints, complex cases and varying priorities. However, we are dedicated to improving our services through better communication, enhanced training, public education campaigns, and maintaining transparent, responsive and efficient operations. Ngā mihi.
Thanks, Aaron. A number of questions. Councillor Wood.
Oh, thank you, Mr Mayor. I didn't think I was first. Thank you for the report. I have some questions about the euthanisation of dogs, or euthanising of dogs. So it says in here 26 were deemed unsuitable for rehoming due to behavioural problems or were deemed a menacing breed. 14 were seized for attacks and weren't collected. So that's 40 that were euthanised for those reasons. What about the other 69? Why were they euthanised?
So the figures that I have, there was 26 surrendered that were unsuitable for rehoming by their owners. 14 were seized for dog attacks and 10 were obviously for menacing breed. The remainder are dogs that were unfortunately not picked up by their owners and not suitable for rehoming for behavioural reasons.
So there were 76 dogs that weren't suitable for rehoming, then not 26?
I'm not quite sure what those figures are, sorry.
Was that, so you're telling me the other 59 dogs were euthanised because they weren't suitable for rehoming. The report says there were only 26 dogs who were euthanised for being not suitable for rehoming, so I'm trying to understand.
That 26 were surrendered and not suitable. The remainder were dogs that were impounded for roaming without an owner or with an owner that weren't collected from the pound. They sit separate to the surrendered dogs.
How many dogs were euthanised that were deemed suitable for rehoming but we were unable to rehome them?
I'm unsure of that exactly, sorry.
Are there any?
Yes, there were. This was due to parvo at the pound, and some dogs we just got stuck with for an exorbitant length of time. We were unable to rehome them.
Okay. 4 different terms used in this report. You talk about dogs with behavioural problems, dogs that are menacing breed, and then we carry on through the report and it talks about menacing dogs and dangerous dogs. So I just want to understand how those 4 different terms interact with each other. When you say menacing breed, is that what's defined under the Dog Control Act as menacing dogs, or are they 2 separate things you're referring to there?
Menacing dogs is, there's 2 separate things. So the menacing breed dogs are obviously pit bulls, tosers, and that type of breed. The menacing classification can also be put on a dog for its behaviour, and it's those ones that we've referred to in there as well.
All right, I might jump back in the queue at the end when I've had a chance to sort of gather my thoughts. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Thanks, Aaron. Just some questions, first of all, about resourcing. So you mentioned some of the resourcing challenges that have been on the team this year. Has that led to like a drop in levels of service in any way, do you think?
The drop in levels of service obviously have been, rather than being a proactive service, we've become reactive. And obviously that's had some bearing on outcomes for jobs. Instead of preempting a roaming dog, we're responding to a roaming dog instead. So yes.
Okay. And in terms of the amount of resourcing that you've been able to put towards rehoming of dogs, has that been affected by your resourcing staff challenges?
Obviously it has. Having said that, we have an officer that's assigned specifically for rehoming now. She will relinquish that role once we get a kennel manager back in the pound.
Okay. So can you explain to us what kind of process is followed to try and rehome a dog if the owner doesn't collect it from the pound?
So first off, we do a behavioural test with the dog. It's quite comprehensive, and that gives us indicators of whether the dog's got any aggression issues, behavioural issues, that type of thing. And then obviously the breed counts towards that, and any history that we have with the dog counts towards it as well.
Okay, and then if it's deemed suitable for rehoming, what process is followed then to try and find it a home?
It's uploaded to our Facebook page, and we also have dogs that are available for rehoming on our website.
On the website, was that? Yeah, okay. Thank you. And Now, in terms of euthanasia of dogs, what process is followed by council for euthanasing dogs, given that there's been some publicity recently regarding another council and the methods that they use? So I just want to be clear about what methods we're using.
So we have a reasonably robust system in place to ensure that there's no accidental euthanasias. It starts off with an email being circulated to the entire team to ask if there's any reason that they know that the dog should be held. The dogs are kept on 3 separate registers, one at the pound, one electronically, and kennel sheets on the kennels. And these are all married up to ensure that the correct dogs, the correct kennel, and obviously the correct dog has been euthanased.
Okay, and do we use captive bolt at all for any euthanasias?
Not at all.
Okay.
Just to add to what I was explaining earlier as well, we also photograph the dogs, and there's a photo of the Ebury dog on their pen. And we are just going to a collar system with a disposable collar, so that there's absolutely no way that people could get the wrong dog, to try and remove that human error.
Oh, that's good to hear. Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Mickelard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Aaron, for the report. Just had a few questions. Number one, on page 79, in relation to dogs being impounded, you've answered some of the questions along these lines, but I just want to understand what's the collection cut-off time before a dog can be euthanized.
So by law, we have to hold the dogs for 7 clear days. We hold the dogs for 10. That's to allow 3 days for the posting of the letter. And the team also hand deliver, if they know where the dog comes from, they'll hand deliver into the letterbox. That is 7 days is the minimum, absolute minimum.
Just to clarify, is it the legislative requirement?
Yes, it is.
All right, cool. Second question comes with the infringement notices that have been dished out. You mentioned in the report that there's 163 infringement that were issued and 10 were waived or cancelled because of extenuating circumstances. Can you just explain to me what are those, what constitutes an extenuating circumstance?
So that might be where somebody no longer has the dog and they were issued an infringement for an unregistered dog. If they could provide evidence for that, then we wipe that infringement. Some of them are infringements that were issued in error that shouldn't have been issued to start with, and they're waived as well. But yeah, it's only under extenuating circumstances. Those 10 that were waived were related entirely to unregistered dogs.
My third question is around community outreach and education. You've mentioned or talked about the resourcing, that further events were planned, however, they are currently on hold due to resourcing. Can you please expand on that? I know that you touched a little bit on that, but can you please expand on this particular section? Is that you do not have resources to continue the service, or is it just staff resourcing that you're referring to?
It's a staff resourcing at the moment. To present in the schools, it takes somebody reasonably special that's skilled in talking to children, and sometimes the staff that we have available don't have that capability.
On page 84, I note that property checks have decreased from 311 in the year 2018-2019 to 37, and that's a huge decline. Would you be able to expand or explain why?
They will be in relation to either unregistered dog checks, or they could possibly be for applications for more than 2 dogs, or preferred owners.
Oh, okay. My last question would probably be, it's encouraging to see the increase of registration tags for dogs. There's an increase from the year 2018 to 2019 from 449 to 9,636. What would you attribute that success to? Is it educational or community outreach promotions?
Yeah, probably a combination of public education, the officers finding dogs that weren't previously registered, people proactively registering their dogs without being prompted, and obviously growth in the city. With that growth comes additional dogs.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I lied. Last question. Page 87. There's an increase, of dogs roaming around the city. And what has been the issue around it? Is it due to lack of fencing or just dogs managing to run away?
There's a combination of reasons for that. This year in particular, we've put it down to possibly as a result of people returning to work that were previously working from home or based at home, who are now going out and forgetting to secure their properties or assuming that the properties are secure.
No, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Finlay.
Yeah, thank you. With the menacing dogs, it's quite interesting to have a look at the list. And I find there's sort of one category that's not there. When we look at the Labrador Retrievers, there's 10 of them there. Now, I presume you don't know the thoroughbreds or the purebreds. So you look at them, you just say, well, it looks like a lab, so it's a lab?
The dogs that are referred to in that chart there are dogs that have been registered as that. So that's what we go off.
Okay.
And these, the likes of Labradors, the non-menacing breeds that are in that list, are as a result of offending of some type.
Okay, so they're registered as Labradors?
Yep.
Because there's no crossbreed there. And I think,
there could be, but our system was unable to pull that out. So it's, I can't define that into Labrador cross or pure lab.
So dogs aren't registered as a crossbreed?
They are, but our system was unable to pull that out.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Naylor.
Oh, thank you. My questions are around dog attacks on top of page 79, particularly the 47 that were attacks on people. 26 are assessed as minor, 14 moderate and 4 serious. I'm just interested to understand how it's defined whether an attack is minor, moderate or serious.
So we use an attack matrix that we've been using for possibly 7 or 8 years now, and to get a consistent approach across all of our dog attacks. And it scores ranges from 11 to 97, and it grades the attacks as minor as 11 to 34, score of 11 to 34, moderate 35 to 59, serious Cat 1 60 to 84, and serious Cat 2, which is 85 to 97. So that takes into account dog history, dog owner history, attitude, obviously severity of the injuries, what led up to the attack, and the victim impact.
Thank you. So the victim impact, does that include psychological impact as well as physical?
Yes, it does.
Yep. Thank you. And just looking at page 84 with the numbers of dangerous and menacing dogs, obviously on the increase, do you keep a record of how many of the attacks, dog attacks, have been caused by dangerous and menacing dogs?
No, we don't, sorry.
Okay, so if we wanted that information, could that be included in future reports?
Yes, it can.
Okay, thank you. And would we need to specifically ask for that? Or?
No.
Yeah.
No.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you for letting me jump back in, Mr. Mayor. I just want to come back to the euthanasia statistics to make sure my understanding is clear. So, of the 30 dogs that were surrendered to council, 26 of them were deemed unsuitable and were euthanised. 14 were seized for attacks, so they weren't surrendered to us. 14 were seized for attacks and euthanised. You said earlier there was 10 that were also euthanised for something else. What was that again?
Menacing breed. So
Menacing
they're
breed.
automatically discounted from rehoming.
Even if they didn't have behavioural issues?
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah.
Okay, and so the other 59 are just a mix of couldn't be rehomed, could be menacing or dangerous.
Yeah, so the remaining 59 are dogs that just weren't picked up or were deemed unsuitable because of behavioural issues. Or, as you alluded to earlier, we did destroy a few that were rehomeable, but we were unable to rehome.
So for every dog we euthanise, I assume we tag the reason that we euthanised them somewhere in the system.
Yes.
To me, there's a big difference between 59, where one of them was rehomeable and got euthanised, versus 30 of them were rehomeable and got euthanised. And I'm not really willing to accept that a portion of them could have been rehomed, but we euthanised them. So,
Councillor, is there a question or?
So how would we go about getting that statistic? Because surely it exists.
We could probably look at getting that statistic for next year, put it into a report next year. That's not something that I currently have available to me.
Could it be part of our long-term plan considerations, given if we have got a significant number of dogs being euthanised that could have been rehomed, we need to consider our own rehoming budgets and funding through the long-term plan?
One of the issues we have currently is that our current facility isn't set up for rehoming, and unfortunately, as a result of that, there are a number of dogs that we've held for weeks at a time that we just couldn't hold any longer. The new facility that we've got coming that we're moving into in February will allow us to better interact with the dogs and interact with the public to try and get them rehomed.
All right. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Finally, Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thanks, Aaron. Just thanks for the inclusion of paragraph 2.7 on page 74. It just talks about some of the data that is available but not available because it's stuck in a database somewhere. Can we expect that by next year that kind of data retrieval thing will be sorted out and we'll have that information included in future reports?
I would love to say absolutely, but at the moment we're struggling to get data out of the new system. But it's definitely something that we will be working on.
So is there a plan to reconcile or solve that data access problem, or has it just been put in the too hard basket?
They're currently working on resolving the issues with it at the moment.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Naylor.
Apologies for coming in a second time. I just, my further question around dog attacks, which I see in Appendix 2, are on the increase. Are we currently have we got any initiatives in place that we're proactively, have we got any thing to try and reduce dog attacks?
We've got an education program that we've rolled out to some of the schools. We've made it available to them, and we've got a staff member that was going around the schools and presenting it, which was aimed at keeping kids safe. Some of the outreaches that we've done during the year, public programs with microchipping and that sort of thing, we've spoken to people here to try and encourage better dog behaviour in the dog parks. But specifically targeting dog attacks, no. It's more of an educational thing that we're rolling out to dog owners on an as we come across them basis.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Arnott, I see you've joined late.
Sorry for jumping in. The euthanasia statistic is obviously quite upsetting. Not everybody would obviously look at the council Facebook page and the council website. Have we ever looked at other areas that we could possibly get the word out that there are animals?
We work with the Marcoms team to try and target audiences as best we can. We used to have a Facebook page that was dedicated solely to palmy pooches for rehoming, but what they found was that the same people were on there all the time, and we weren't moving dogs, we weren't rehoming. So they integrated into the council Facebook page to try and boost the audience.
Thank you. We don't ever contact other, like SPCA, and say, hey, this is what we've got, sort of thing?
Yeah, we do work with Paws Animal Shelter in Fielding and the SPCA, and if there's any dogs that we think are suitable, that they're happy to take on. The problem at the moment is that the rehoming agencies around the city, but like around New Zealand as a whole, are struggling to rehome dogs.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, sir.
All right, thanks, Aaron. Thank you very much. Okay, so look, we've got recommendation to council there that we receive the report around the dog control policy and the practices for the city. pursuant to the Act, as attached in the memo titled Annual Section 10A Dog Control Act 1996 report, and obviously presented today. I'm happy to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. I'll open it up for any comments. Perhaps I will make one comment and just thanks Aaron and to the team. It's clear that the people are working across multiple sites. I think Aaron made the comment himself that things will get better once we get on one site, and that probably can't come soon enough for the officers involved. But I know through speaking with the CE that this will get better in terms of getting to one site. People being able to work as a team and proactively look at how we look after dogs in the city. But it comes down to owner responsibility and owner education as well. So it's clear that the numbers haven't quite moved in that space either. So looking forward to the coming year and everything else. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I'd just like to start by thanking Aaron and the team, particularly because I think it's been quite a challenging year in terms of people being seconded out of the team, resourcing issues in terms of staff, trying to maintain level of service, and all the time, working in a facility that, as we know, has got severe limitations. So just want to acknowledge the work done and for stepping up, Aaron. That's appreciated. I must admit, I do share some of, I presume, Councillor Wood's concerns about euthanasia numbers. There has been a big increase, and I think it would be useful to know whether some of that increase is due to financial constraints on owners just not being able to pay to get the dogs out of the pound, or whether it is for some other reason. But I think there's a couple of issues here. One is if owners are not paying to get their dogs out of the pound, what's the reason for that? Is it an affordability issue? Is it that they don't want to take responsibility for the animal's behaviour? Is it something else? I don't know. But that would be useful information for us, particularly when we're considering the levels of fees and charges, because it's actually counterproductive for us to have people leaving their animals at the pound, and then our officers have to accompany those animals to be euthanised, which is a stressful part of the job, I'm sure. And then I think it would be helpful for us to have a bit of an insight into the reasons for euthanasia. Clearly, if an animal has got a bad history or is aggressive, that's one thing. But if there's a highish proportion of animals that could make good pets that are being euthanized for one reason or another, I think, again, it'd be useful for us to know that, so we could look at whether or not there's any changes we might need to make the rehoming more successful. So I think every single one of us is looking forward to the new facility opening, better facilities for the animals and for staff and for members of the public that interact with the service. So, thank you for your work.
Okay, we will vote. It has passed 13 votes for and none against. Thank you. All right, move through to number 12, which is the Council's work schedule, September 2023. And it's on page 89, 90 and 91, and 92 and 93. So look, I'm quite happy to move that. So recommendation to Council that we receive the work schedule dated 4th of October 2023 and seconded by the Deputy Mayor. There are no comments. We will vote, please. That's passed 12 votes for and none against. All right, moving through to recommendations from committees, and I'll go to the Chair of Culture and Sport, Councillor Bowen, to speak to that September meeting.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to present the recommendations from the Part 1 Public Strategy and, no, not Finance Committee, Culture and Sport Committee on the 13th of September 2023 for adoption, please.
I'm happy to second that for you.
Thank you.
Any comments, matters arising? There being none, we will vote, please. That has passed 12 votes for, none against. Moving to number 14, which again I'll invite the Chair, Councillor Dennison, of Strategy and Finance, to speak to the September meeting. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to move that the recommendations from the Strategy and Finance Committee meeting from the 20th of September be adopted. Thank you.
And seconded by Deputy Councillor Naylor. Thank you. Are there any matters arising? Being none, we will vote. And that has passed 14 votes for and none against. All right, moving to number 15, which again I'll invite the Chair, Councillor Johnson of the Community Development Committee to speak to the September meeting. Councillor.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I'd like to present the Part 1 Public Community Committee recommendation from the 27th of September 2023 for adoption.
And seconded by Deputy Councillor Hancock. Can I just ask that 1 and 2 be separated, please? All right. I'm not going to waste people's time, so we'll if we could vote on 1, please, unless there's any other comments. No, we'll vote on 1, thanks. And that has passed 13 votes for, 1 against. And we'll move to number 2. And if we could vote on number 2, please. And that's 14 votes for and none against. Thank you. All right, councillors, what we're going to do is we'll move into exclusion of the public, but then we will break for lunch and then we'll come back for this after lunch. So just it's nice and clear for everybody. So we're looking to exclude the public as for reasons shown on the agenda papers and on screen. I just want to include in the resolution that we allow our advice for HR, Anne Herbert from Streamline HR to join us, and I'll look to move this, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. If there are no comments to that, we will vote, please. And that has passed 14 votes for, none against. Thank you. All right, we'll adjourn the now till 1:40, and we'll see you back in the chamber here. Thank you.